Thursday. Happy Thursday. I'm excited about today's conversation. I think it's going to be really good and informative. So, guys, if you are on here, get those likes up. Get those likes up, guys. Show support to the show. You can find me on Cash App or Venmo, Shay Sade. Also, super chats are open. I will be sure to acknowledge and read all super chats. So I think this is going to be a very good and also a very much needed conversation. All of you guys are fully aware of the commotion that has happened since the sudden passing of Kevin Samuels, and just how it just seems like it is his passing itself has brought up so much controversy, and I think it has brought to light so many issues that were already there, but are just now blatantly for everybody to see as it pertains to the Black community, as it pertains to, Black men, Black male image. And so I wanted to talk about this because as a Black woman, I can say that I am distraught, quite honestly, and have been very, very disturbed at the way that his passing, I think, has been used as a way to create division, to fuel this gender war, to really start to reinforce just different negative stereotypes, and at the end of the day, I think just create even more division in the Black community, in a community that's already, by the way, at risk. So I thought it was going to be really important to bring on both of these individuals who I think have done. I highly respect what they do. The message that they bring, the way that they have worked with Black men. So I'm really excited to have both of them on. So I'm going to bring them up and we're going to begin the conversation. Okay. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
How's it going? Okay.
What's going on, Torraine?
What's good, brother? How are you?
I'm good, man. How about yourself?
I'm good, man. It's good to be on the panel with you, man. I really respect your work, as you already know.
Oh, likewise.
Yes.
Torraine is the man.
Yeah. Awesome. So again, thank you both of you guys again just for the time to be here and to share your perspective. I think more than ever, it's really important to show that yes, men and women can work together, Black men and women can work together and collaborate together, and at the very least seek to understand the perspective. One of the things that I appreciated about Kevin Samuels is that I think he brought to light the perspective of men that had been silenced for so long. So that this is why, although I didn't agree with anything all the time, or didn't always agree with the tone, as some women complain about, at the end of the day, I think he was necessary and needed, and he showed how no, men, they do need to come to the table. They do need to be in the conversation when it comes to relationships, at the very least, dating and waiting community. So again, I appreciate you guys for coming in here and just showing that, yeah, we should and could continue to Black men and Black women talk, work together, and try to understand where we're coming from.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No. I'm fine.
Okay. So just to get right into the question, as I mentioned before, there's been a lot of commotion since the whole passing of Kevin Samuels. It came as a shock to probably almost everyone. And it also has really been an opportunity for people to really show their colors, if you will. So my first question, and I will direct this to you first, Dr. Johnson. Why do you think so many Black women were celebrating the death of Kevin Samuels?
Wow. Well, my assessment is that there's been a recent blowback as far as gender relations go that I don't think a lot of people understand. Most particularly, a lot of Black women, they see it as an attack that came out of nowhere from Black men. Like when they look at the Manosphere and Kevin being the tip of that spear, they look at it like, well, this just came out of nowhere, and there's just such hatred for Black women. One, it's not about hatred. That's not what it is. But there's also a lack of historical context. You know what I mean? I'm Generation X. I'm coming up on 50. And one things I can tell you, being born in 74, the 1980s was critical because it kicked off a whole new era, really the mid 70s, but we saw it in the 80s where Black feminists started to get a lot of public notoriety, most particularly filtered through Oprah Winfrey, We saw everything from talk shows to magazines to movies to, TV shows, films. They just came out of nowhere almost, and a lot of it was fixated on telling Black men what they're doing wrong. And this is also during the war on drugs. So you had this transition point at the end of the 70s where a lot of jobs were gone. You had this issue where many Black men in urban areas only had certain avenues to operate in. So you had this drug war going, you had incarceration, you had gang wars, you had all of this happening. And then all of a sudden you had this whole new area in media that had, mainstream access that really fixated on Black men being the problem in Black relationships. And this has been 4 decades strong. And for the most part, outside of maybe hip hop, where you had a few artists that may talk about a few things, Black men, for the most part, didn't really have a major platform to respond. And even in hip hop, you really had some young guys that, may have had a contract, may have had an album here or there, maybe a few comedians, your Eddie Murphys, your Chris Rocks, but Black men had to filter their kind of talking points through the occasional celebrity that may say something on their behalf. And then by the time you get to social media, now all of a sudden you have this open platform that's free, it's easily accessible. And after, a number of years, Black men start to share their experiences and compare notes. So Kevin comes out of that discourse, and Torraine did a beautiful video. Y'all got to go to Torraine Walker's channel here on YouTube and check out the video he did explaining the relevance of the manosphere and the context it comes out of, because that's what we're looking at. So to get to your question about Black women and the responses, a lot of the contempt and the rage and the anger is because you have many of them that are approaching this ahistorically, and they're looking at this as some kind of just attack that came out of nowhere. But it's not necessarily an attack, but it is a response to 40 years of mischaracterization of Black men. And Black men are finally, responding, but it's not rooted in a politically correct movement. It's not coming out of the academy. It's not coming out of Hollywood. So it doesn't have the veneer and the polish that some of those other spaces have. It's raw. I mean, I know brothers who got a smartphone that are homeless, all the way to brothers who are presidents of universities and banks and running banks. And those are the brothers that are in this space. There's such a wide spectrum of Black men who are responding not only to the lack of voice that Black men have had over the decades, but also the experiences they've had in their own families and in their own lives. And so you have a pent up space where there's been no voice for a long time, and it exploded. So what's being read as hatred is really a lot of intensity and pent up silence that's finally, broken through. And that's what you get. And Kevin just happened to be the face of that. But there's a larger movement of men that have a lot to say.
That makes so much sense. And I like that you touched upon the point of it being a lot of it just being based upon an ignorance or a lack of understanding, because I can speak to even some of my earliest understanding, or I guess when I was introduced to Kevin Samuels, and my first initial response of it just being like, oh, like he just like things like this or that, like it's not as polished as you said, more rough. But and I remember having a few conversations with my husband where he would ask me certain questions. He would say certain things, and I'd be like, "Gosh, I never really thought about that. Gosh, wow, that's a good point." And so, after listening and then starting to do my own research, it really started to bring a larger understanding as to what was going on and what he represented. Of course, we can all sit there and talk about his tone or talk about things that he said that were maybe out of context or could have been said better. We can all sit
didn't you binge watch like a lot of Kevin one? Is that what you did?
I did. I think it was like a 50 hour because when I looked over, now it wasn't all at once. It wasn't all at once. It was like months and months and months. And I looked and I was like, wait, I've watched a lot of his content. And the funny thing about it was when I first heard him, I was like, this guy is narcissistic. I don't like his approach. He's just rude. And then like the next day I went and watched more content. And then I just kept on watching because it was something I had never really heard. Well, I'll say this. I think I've kind of heard men in the past say it. Like I'd heard my dad say certain things. I would be like, okay, or you hear men over there. But I guess I always thought I was like, okay, well, that's just that person or that's that person. But I think hearing it from him on a platform where he was getting so much support, it just was like, this is, I don't know. It was interesting. I don't know how else to put it. It was like, this is interesting. Like other people are really listening to this and taking this in and agreeing with it. Maybe maybe this is something I should at the very least consider or try to understand where he's coming from. And you wanted to talk about, the Oprahs and the Ricky Lakes and all of the years of media being really focused on women. And I couldn't deny it. I worked in a marketing department. I worked in agencies, and the amount of times we would sit down and create marketing campaigns that were specifically geared to women, it's like, I can't think of one campaign that I was in or one think group or whatever tank I was in where we were trying to target men. It was exclusively women. So it's like, I knew in my own experience that the market was very much geared to women. So I was like, I have to at the very least listen, because maybe this is something I never heard, but a lot of people are feeling like this.
Well, that part of the issue though is a lot of this is framed as the more we hear, the more right it must be. So we've been hearing about women for years, which must mean that they're right or their issues are correct, and we need to focus on them. But a lot of it is based on consumerism. Women are the bigger consumers. So television, talk shows, daytime television, media, magazines, they're fixated on women for the sake of profit. And so we read it as, if I hear this more often, they must be right. Whereas the market is looking at it like, how can we raise as much capital as possible? And so the two kind of fuse together in a detrimental way that leaves many Black men in general, but especially Black men, in a position of vulnerability.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. Money, consumerism. There's a lot of money to be made off of misandry, especially Black male misandry. And I think that is a driving force behind some of the things that we're seeing. But Mr. Walker, so what do you have on the question? Why do you think so many Black women were celebrating the death of Kevin Samuels?
Well, the brother Dr. Johnson raised some very good points. And as far as that question, first of all, I want to say that I think it's important for people and your viewers and people in general to understand that while the celebration of any Black man's death by other Black people and Black women is vile, it's important to understand that the people who are doing that are a very small subset of Black women who are doing this. The issue is that very small subset is a very powerful and very influential subset. I was online most of last weekend observing some of the things that were being said. And a lot of the people who were doing this were people who have book deals and people who have content deals with HBO and people who work in the academy. And that's the danger. Now, as far as why this is, to Dr. Johnson's point, the last 50 years or so, the Black voice has been largely feminine. It's been largely feminist, which is not female, and it's been largely matriarchal. What that means is, as you said, you're a marketer. I come to it from a media point of view. It's a very well-known fact that if you want to appeal to the Black community, you appeal to the Black woman. Now, the way you do that is, in America, you have to cater to what marketers and business people think that Black women want to hear. Right. And what Black women want to hear as a majority are that, Black girl magic, Black women are perfect, Black women can do no wrong. And the reason why that is because over 400 years, we've had the denigration of Black women. We've had the degradation, the physical degradation of Black women, and the marginalization and the ostracization of Black women as far as beauty standards. So I understand where that comes from. What you're seeing is a massive push to say that Black women are valued, Black women are worthy, Black women deserve to be valued, and Black women are beautiful. What happened was, because in the midst of that push, the Black male voice has been marginalized and it's been basically silenced, to the point where, through shows like, Oprah Winfrey Show in the 80s and 90s, through content like Waiting to Exhale, and especially The Color Purple. Things like that set up this idea that the Black man, it reinforces the American ideal that the Black man is a grunting, hulking boogeyman that doesn't have any sort of intellect, and he can only be controlled through his women or through direct state violence. So that's what you're seeing. What the death of Kevin Samuels kind of reinforced the fact that we have almost 2 generations of women who have been indoctrinated in this way of thinking. So anything or any man that pushes back against that is automatically going to be met with hostility and ostracism, or it's going to be met with anger. So that's what you're seeing. And his death really just gave people a way to vent that frustration and vent that shock at the fact that there was a man who was intelligent, who was well-dressed, who was setting up the idea that we need to bring black people, black men and black women back to some sort of standard. That way we can create a black family, and that way we can create a black community. At one point in time in the 70s, up until maybe like the mid 80s, the focus of black academia, and I'm actually working on a video about this now, the focus of black studies, the focus of black academia was very radical. You had the desegregation of universities, and the first students who came into that way were one or two ways. They were the peaceful, nonviolent protesters, and you also had the black radical tradition that came out of the Panthers, that came out of Deacons for Defense, and people who were raised in that way. If you go back and look at a lot of the struggles and a lot of the student protests that happened in the 1960s and 70s, a lot of those were led by black radical students who were trying to get a black curriculum into the school system. And they were fairly successful. And that was a direct threat to the white power structure in America. So they had to destroy that system. And what they did was they brought feminism into campus curriculums and brought that into campus studies to kind of dilute that. So you started to see the separation of black men from black women. You started seeing LGBT groups come in and start separating that further, fragmenting that. So what happened was it started being a situation where you were talking about black struggle and black progress into all these niche groups where we were focused on gender and sexual identity. And that traveled all the way into the 80s and 90s, where what you see now is you see all these different fragmentations of black groups, where if you say anything about black men in general, the automatic response to people is, what about black women? What about black gender nonconforming people?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean those people aren't valid, but that is completely different than what people were fighting about at that time, which was a unified black struggle to progress black people. So what you're seeing now with all that is like you see the marginalization of black males. And that's the way it was from the 80s to the 90s, where, you know, if you were not speaking up to the idea of black women are perfect and black women are can do no wrong, you were either pushed to the side or ostracized. So Kevin Samuels, what he did was he took the conversations that we have, that black men have amongst themselves with each other, at bars, at barbershops, you know, in spaces where we are speaking amongst ourselves. He was able to package that in a way that it was appealing to women and men. And because it was outside of the traditional norms of academia and the traditional norms of the networks, for lack of a better term, it didn't go through the perceived channels of academia or network TV.
Right.
You know, he automatically reached directly to his fan base. Like Dr. Johnson said, you know, you got brothers who are homeless with cell phones. You got brothers who are academia who can't speak, but they can identify with Kevin Samuels on the quiet. So he was great. He was able to gather a mass movement. And what happens when every time when black people do a grassroots mass movement, it's a threat and it has to be neutralized. So his death and was a celebration of the idea that a black mass movement threat that doesn't come through the talented 10th or doesn't come through TV that's censored with a 5-second delay had to be destroyed. So that's what that was, and that's what you're seeing. I don't think it's not going to stop, but that's what you're seeing at the result of his death. You're seeing the gatekeepers who are rejoicing at the fact that somebody who could galvanize people is gone.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
There's some Torraine pointed to. He raised a lot of good points. One of the things that hit me was when he talked about, you know, this, you know, this movement where we perceived ourselves as black, as one group responding politically, especially out of the 60s. But one of the major changes has been, you know, this separation of identity. And I think it really, I have this concept where I talk about the black masculinist turn, where you have these moments where black men are starting to have realizations that things are very different than they were in the late 60s and the early 70s and even in the 80s. They're very different moments. One of those moments I think that was key not too long ago was Ice Cube online talking to what do you call it? I keep forgetting the name of their channel. The Coffee with Queens or
Cocktails with Queens on Fox.
Cocktails with Queens.
Okay. Yeah.
Vivica Fox, and you know, there was that critical moment where he's trying to put forth this plan to improve the quality of life for Black America, and he hits this wall where these women are saying, no, you have to talk about Black women explicitly. But not only did he not talk about Black women, he didn't talk about Black men. He didn't talk about LGBT. He didn't bring gender up at all. He was talking about the Black community, and hitting this wall was this moment where he got so much pushback from these women on the basis of being Black and pushing a Black agenda that it gave him pause. And I think for many Black men watching that, it was a moment where they had to really go, wait a minute, this is different. We've been thinking about the Black community in a communal sense and trying to push for this generic idea, but there's a whole different ideological movement predicated on identity that has fractured a lot of that. And many of us didn't know to what extent that had happened until you got to a moment like that. Now we could say there are other moments that echoed it, but I think that moment was so key. And now, and I would argue that Kevin Samuel's death is another one of those moments, because seeing the blowback, seeing the hostility and the contempt that seems to be focused on Kevin, but it doesn't take long before it goes out to black men as a whole. Those are the moments where you have black men, maybe who aren't even involved in these discussions, who are looking at this saying, wait a minute, this is not this is not the black community I thought it was.
And another point another point you raised just now, Dr. Johnson, was along with what happened with Ice Cube, the last election really brought that home as well, because the 2020 election was a really strong manifestation of the idea that you have to appeal to the idea that you can't pandering to black women if you want to get anything. The entire Biden-Harris campaign, especially when Kamala Harris became the VP nom, was an actual excellent textbook case to see how you can pander to one aspect of the community while ignoring the rest. Yes. Because so many black women who were, and I understand why that happened. Kamala Harris was sort of the manifestation of the black woman success ideal. It was like, you're a black career woman. You went into the American system. You reached the highest points you can reach in this system. And she was the manifestation of that. So, of course, from an emotional level, not even a psychological or intellectual level, a lot of black women identify with her almost to the same way that a lot of black men identify with Barack Obama back in 2008. But and if I had to think about that, I understand why that was, because I got caught up in the idea of Barack Obama as well, because I came through that same I matriculated through that same idea. I was in corporate America. I was a black man. I thought that Barack Obama represented the ideal of a black man reaching the highest level of achievement in America. But I will say that I didn't separate myself as a black man to say that. I saw that this was a representation of all black people. What happened with Kamala Harris was she was a representation specifically for black women. And I understand why there was an emotional response and why there was so much pushback to any black man who said, well, whoa, look at her record. Look at what she's done in California. And look at who she's partnered herself with. She's partnered herself with Joe Biden, who's one of the authors of the 1994 crime bill that sent a lot of black men out of the community into the mass incarceration system and into the prison industrial complex. You were dealing with, in 2020, you were dealing with the aftermath of an Obama effect, where a lot of black people have put all their hopes and idealism into Obama and they got disappointed. So what you were seeing wasn't a pushback against Kamala. It was a pushback against the idea that just because somebody's black, we should go automatically rock with that. And I think a lot of black women and a lot of professional women saw that as a direct attack on them, which is why you started seeing people like a Jamel Hill and people who are connected to ESPN and connected to academia and connected to corporate America automatically attacking black men who were saying, whoa, let's wait a minute, let's pump the brakes and see who this person really is. And you saw a lot of direct, harsh attacks against black men, to the point where I actually created a hashtag called Blame Black Men, because the attacks were getting so crazy that you couldn't even say anything. You couldn't even have a legitimate critique of their record without getting attacked. And that showed you the effectiveness of siloing black communities and siloing black culture into these little boxes that can be controlled by other people who can annex them to their ideals. So that's what I think we're dealing with as well. And Kevin Samuels, again, his death is just a manifestation of that in a later day.
But Shay, what's interesting, Shay, is I think this gender split has been just under the water level, and it took certain things for it to break out and become obvious. But I mean, consider like if we go back to Obama and we look at that, or even the rise of BLM, let's take those two instances, right? The rise of BLM, you had an organization that looked like it was opposing police brutality and police homicide. Now, from a black community standpoint, that's been, that's been a long-standing tradition. So we received BLM on the assumption that it was referencing a tradition of that. We did not really anticipate how deeply entrenched they were into a very particular politic that was rooted in LGBT issues more so than it was in other areas, right? So that was one of those breakout moments. But even if we go to Obama, there were many black men that identified with the idea of an Obama. Now, for black women, and this is something I've been contending for a number of years, I don't think black women voted for Obama. I believe black women voted for Michelle. And Obama was a proxy for Michelle. Because two questions. One, if Obama was with a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white woman, would he have been president as far as Black America is concerned? I don't believe so. And truthfully, Kamala, I believe, and this might be my political naivete, and you guys can correct me, I think Kamala wouldn't be where she was if Michelle had decided to run. I think a lot of women were really pushing Michelle to go into politics, and she didn't want to. She was very fortunate. She said she didn't want to run. But I think had she run, especially right after Obama's presidency, it would be a whole different political platform. Black women were deeply invested, in Torraine's right, in the expansion of Black women in politics. But in lieu of Michelle, who they trusted and valued, you had Kamala that they were happy to grab onto and put up there. But my point in saying these two examples is that this gender rift has been there, but it was under the surface and it didn't really explode to the extent where it is now until certain key moments. And there've been a few of them. And Kevin's death is the latest one, where it's apparent and cannot be denied that there is a serious fracture that needs to be addressed. And too many of our discussions in the public stream don't really deal with it. They refuse to deal with it, so it continues to fester, and you have this split getting wider and wider.
Man, that's so much to unpack there. And I think, as I mentioned before, I always knew that this existed. I knew that there was money to be made off of this, based upon some of the conversations we had previously, some of the information I've learned of as of late. So I knew that there was money to be made off of it. But I think the thing that was the most disturbing to me was to see how there could be such a blatant level of disrespect and then it be largely unchecked. That to me, where I was just like, whoa. Because as I mentioned before, in my previous videos, it's like if you have content creators with hundreds of thousands of followers being shot out in like Rolling Stone, right, or being shot out in like larger major media companies, and those are the women who are openly disparaging his name, openly using this as a reason to say that these Black men are nakers who are now going to avenge their daddy's death. So ladies get strapped, ladies get guns, like using this as a reason. This person has the eyes and the ears of the mainstream media. That to me, where I was just like, this is bananas. Like, this is crazy. This isn't just, and I hope what Mr. Walker is saying is true, that it's a small subset of women who actually believe this and they have a large influence, but nevertheless, whether it's large or small, the influence is still there. Like I said, you still have mainstream media listening to some of these content creators who are saying, I'm speaking on the collective of Black women. And it is almost always positioned as oppositional to the men. And to me, it never really made any logical sense. And I never really understand, like, why and how has this been the norm? And how can we as Black women think that we're leveling up or doing well when we are consistently putting ourselves in positions or sharing messages that put us at odds with the men that we want protection from? Like, it doesn't make any sense, and it's incredibly dangerous. So
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I do that a lot. I'm sorry. Well, if you look at the history of America, it makes perfect sense, because America has never wanted the Black community to be strong, and they have never wanted Black men and Black women to be on one accord. Just in American society, the interactions between men and women in general are very bad, and they're very fractured as a rule. I think there's something that a lot of Black people who don't hang around white people need to understand, is that like I've said before, I worked in corporate America for a number of years.
Mm.
White men and white women don't like each other either. I've been on, trust me, I've been on business trips. I've been one of the guys in a suit in a room with other white guys on business trips in a bar hat sitting around talking. White men talk about their women like dogs. But they do that amongst themselves, is what they do. And I think with white people, there is a general dislike between white men and white women, that I don't even think that Black men and Black women have really reached that level yet. But to your point, the idea of a Black man and a Black woman interacting in a peaceful way and interacting in a respectful adult way has never been a goal of this country, because to keep Black people fractured is to keep them weakened. So that's why you're seeing people who feel this way in Rolling Stone and like in the New York Times and things like that. But you're right, it is a very small group, but again, they're a very influential group, because if you're an academic and you're able to laugh about the death of a Black man and you're a Black person, what that does is it allows white feminists and it allows your white colleagues and your white counterparts to laugh along with you, because they're using you as a shield and a proxy for how they really feel about black men anyway. That's the danger. When you have a book deal or you have a deal at HBO, like there was one person, I'm not going to name them, but you can look it up, who had a podcast, and they got a book and they have a deal with HBO, who was saying that I can't remember say it verbatim, but they were saying that you had the audacity to compare this dead Negro to bell hooks, and you're insane. And when people see that, their partners and the people who they partner with in business laugh along with that as well. So what you're seeing is, so don't be shocked or surprised that these sort of things gain traction, because this society wants black people to be at odds because it helps the society. What I think has to happen though is, and I will say this, I have also seen a lot of pushback from a lot of celebrities, male and female, who were either helped by Kevin Samuels on a professional level because he was an image consultant before he was anything. Who were saying that, there were people like Marlon Wayans. There were a couple of actresses who were saying that, rest in peace, this brother, he helped me out. He got me into my relationship. That sort of thing happened. And you started to see some pushback to them. But because their platforms are bigger than theirs, it doesn't really have that same reach. So I think what that does is it also opens up the discourse in the public sphere to say that, wow, not everybody felt this way about this man's death. There were also people who were also very famous and influential who were working with him as well, who felt the way about him as well, and they had love and respect for him. So I think that happens. But as far as like what has to happen, I think people who feel that these gender wars and these things are dangerous have to speak out a little bit more. And I understand how scary that can be, because I understand fully well that there's sort of a cabal that happens in academia and media, where if you don't toe the quote unquote black feminist party line, it can be detrimental to your career, or it can create problems for you. But somebody has to start having courage to be able to speak out against some of these things if they don't agree with them, and say that, no, this is how we feel. You don't speak for all of us, and there are other people who have alternate points of view. Until that happens, it's going to be problematic.
It's a lot of bullying that's going on in many ways. And I would also add, there were also a number of married women that have been talking about how much their marriages have improved, listening to Kevin and talking to their husbands. I don't have to tell you that, Shay. I mean, just talking to their husbands, opening up dialogue. And part of the reason for that is Kevin brought in talking points that have been banned from the relationship discussion for years. And so that opened up for, a whole new level of honesty and dialogue that's usually been one-sided in many ways. But in response to something else Torraine pointed out when he talked about the person who may have had ties to HBO and this question about connecting bell hooks and Kevin, that's very likely a response to a blog piece I wrote, where I actually in the very first paragraph made that connection. And what I was saying was that you did not see a widespread collective gesture by multiple groups of black men celebrating her passing. And we're talking about the woman that actually said that the Central Park Five were likely guilty. You know what I mean? That's huge. As a feminist who is ensconced in the university, who's considered one of the well-respected voices for black feminism, for her to come out and say that these boys are likely guilty because of their black manhood, their perceptions of black manhood, this is highly problematic. And even despite that, when she passed away after having a very long career, you didn't see scores of black men dancing on her grave, metaphorically speaking. You didn't see it. And so in response to that, I had people, well, yes, they did. I know this guy, and he wrote a tweet where he said he didn't like her when she died. And I'm like, when you compare that to the response to Kevin Samuels, there's no comparison. And I don't care which high-profile feminist you're talking about who passed away, you never saw black men engage in this kind of behavior, even when some of their statements or media productions were highly problematic for black men. You still didn't see it. And so that was the one, that was the that connection is the one I made. And I know a lot of people had some visceral reactions to, but I was very intentional with that.
Absolutely. No, that makes so much sense. And all I can say is I can agree. And usually what I find sometimes when different conversations that are had with women, or you bring these different issues to light, it's interesting how you may change the goalposts, or you may deflect and say, oh, well, this person was celebrating or was promoting hatred, I should celebrate him, or this person was this. And they always go back to the talking points that are taken out of context and never really deal with like some of the core issues. Right. So I could not agree more. Real quick, I do want to acknowledge, I did see some super chats come through. Shout out to Urban Eagle first for the 5 on the super sticker. I appreciate you. Also, let's see, we have, okay, see the 18th letter. Shout out for the $4.99 super chat. I think it's time for us as Black men to get aggressive and to pushing back against any opposition that's against us, and that includes these gynocrats. I agree. With the statements that were made earlier, where it's just like, hey, if you actually really do believe that this is a serious concern and you have a platform or the wherewithal to do so, then you should speak on it. You should absolutely speak on it. And yeah, you may get some hate. My channel isn't even that big yet, and I've gotten all kinds of hate just because I believe that men's voice should be heard. But it's like, that comes with the territory. Nevertheless, if it means the health, if it means bridging the gap, if it means ending some of this propaganda or some of this evilness that is, by the way, going to backfire on Black women, it's going to backfire on us, then it needs to be done. Again, shout out to Dame C. I see Superwoman Shay, Dr. Johnson, and Torraine. Guys, if you're on here, get those likes up. I see 233 viewers. I need at least 200 likes, guys. Likes are free. Also, if you like this show, this content what we're about, please show support. I do my best to bring you guys content that is entertaining, informative, but this is a community effort. I do depend upon your support to keep this show going. So send in some love, Cash App, Venmo, Shay. Also, super chats are open, and I will acknowledge and read all super chats. So just to move on into the next question, I know, like I said, there's so much here to unpack, you guys. And I think you did a great job of really starting to break down, okay, why we're seeing it. Because to your point, what you said earlier, Mr. Walker, that when you understand the history of this nation and you understand the intention for the Black community, the Black family, then I guess you can't really be surprised that there wouldn't be a concerted effort to make sure that the community could thrive. You shouldn't really be surprised by that. So I'm like, that's a fair point. Okay, so on to the next question. So we've kind of touched upon this, but if you want to go into this a little bit more deeply, feel free to. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Walker. Does the response to Kevin Samuel's death expose the racist elements of feminism?
Absolutely, it does. And it also shows how deeply those racist elements of feminism have infiltrated what you want to call Black feminism. There has been, there's been a push over the past, I guess I say maybe over the past 5 years, where you begin to see conversations where Black feminists are starting to separate themselves from calling themselves feminists into womanists. And I think if you look at what happens if you look at womanism, if you look at the core ideas of womanism, there's nothing really wrong with womanism, because womanism, and Dr. Johnson can correct me if I misspeak here, is the idea that Black women have been completely marginalized by traditional mainstream feminism. And it's a way for Black women to sort of like center themselves and center their communities from a feminist or woman-centered standpoint. And there are a lot of people who I know who consider themselves womanists, who actually, I agree with that. I agree that there definitely needs to be a space for Black women to be able to center themselves and build amongst themselves and then build with the communities. What's happened is people who are hardcore feminists who are Black are starting to infiltrate into the idea of womanism, and they're starting to bring along the mainstream ideas of feminism, where the Black man is a boogeyman and the Black man is as a predator, which is what a lot of mainstream feminism is. There's a separation to call it white feminism and Black feminism, but really at the core is all feminism. And the core of feminism in America is the idea that the Black man is the boogeyman. And that goes all the way back to the Seneca Conference with Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. This idea that a Black man is not allowed to speak, or a Black man or a Black families are not allowed to gain anything until the white woman is centered first. That is the core tenet of feminism in America. Now, of course, and there's different offshoots of it, like in England and other places like that were still active at that time in the 1800s. But in America, the idea of feminism is that the white woman deserves to be on equal par with white men, and everybody else has to get whatever scraps they can get after that. So, yeah, to answer your question, yeah, it shows the white racist tenets of feminism, and it shows how well indoctrinated a lot of Black women and a lot of Black men as well, who consider themselves feminists, but they're really not. They're really opportunists, are indoctrinated in this white supremacist idea that Black men have to be silenced and destroyed. I mean, let's just be real about it. Now, I'm gonna come out of my erudition a little bit. Just be honest. A lot of these guys who you see, especially online, who parrot a lot of this stuff, a lot of them are simps, straight up. That's really what it is. They're trying to, they're opportunists. They're trying to get at women, and they feel like the way to do that is be like the guy in the bar who keeps feeding women drinks and telling you and saying, yes, baby, I agree. Yeah, that dude is a dog. I agree with everything you say. That's really what that is.
So you wake up in his apartment the next morning, man.
It's the exact same. It's the exact same thing, baby. Yeah, right. That's a dog, baby. Here, get this drink. That's exactly the way those dudes move. That's what that is.
Absolutely. There's a lot of virtue signaling, and a lot of that took place right after. I mean, the hour that it hit social media that he had passed, you saw a lot of virtue signaling. So you did see a lot of people celebrating, and then you also saw men who were coming forward to say, "I'm better than him. I would never do that. He's such a monster," and X, Y, and Z. And it was shameful. It was shameful.
Every singles bar got that same type of dude in it.
You know, and I always wonder how many of those men behind closed doors or in a room with men only would change up their narrative, or if some of them legitimately believe that everything he was saying was totally and 100% perfect. The Black woman is God. The Black woman can do no wrong. She's the most unprotected. Yada yada yada. Like I just wonder if there is a large population of men who legitimately believe that, or they play a role just to be opportunist. I don't know. It's something I think about.
I don't have any data one way or the other. I can only give an anecdotal response, but I can tell you I've been to conferences. I've sat at homes with scholars, and you get a few glasses of wine or a couple beers in them, and you find out that a lot of that is performance. A lot of that is, and you gotta look at the incentives that go with that, right? Career advancement, all those type of things that go with that. Offending students. I mean, look, I had a whole group of female students who wanted to get me fired because I showed statistics on Black male homelessness, incarceration. I just put statistics on the board about Black men, and that was grounds, as far as they were concerned, to try and get me fired. So it's such a fraught space that there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of reason to not speak up and say anything. And if you can compliment women, whether it's in media production or whether it's in the academy, it's you can get along a lot easier. It's the path of least resistance.
That's very true, and I can speak to that as well. I'm not an academic, but a lot of academics I speak with, I'll have my DMs and people who reach out to me tell me all the time that it's so glad that we have people who are speaking up for us because we can't speak. There are a lot of Black men and Black women who work in academia and work in mainstream media who don't really rock with a lot of these hateful narratives about Black men, but they can't say anything because their jobs are in jeopardy because of that. And then you have to ask yourself, what created the climate where you work in places where public discourse and kicking around ideas should be the norm? Right. You can't even voice an idea that says, well, maybe we should look at some of the outcomes of Black men, or maybe we should look at some of the narratives that we're pushing out in the media about Black men, and that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Like what happened with just a month ago, Tina Knowles Lawson produced a really real documentary called Profile, the Black Man. And it was about how Black men have been historically profiled in America, and how a lot of the police outcomes that we see have a historical context going back to ever since we landed on these shores. And the pushback she got from women and a lot of these same dudes who we talk about was crazy to me. And this is the mother of their icon, Beyonce, and she couldn't even get a pass to even talk about Black men. That shows you the hostility towards Black men in America.
They attacked her, and it hadn't even come out yet. Nobody had even seen it yet, and she got attacked just because the mention of it.
Oh, it was disgusting. I went to the page where they had the petition to try to remove it. It was disgusting. I'm trying to think of like deplorable. It was like it was some of the most evil rhetoric I've ever seen. And I'm just like, how do you have this much hatred? Like I look at some of this up to me and I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone. I'm like, where did this come from? And I know you had made a mention of this, Mr. Walker, about sometimes it seems as if women who grew up in trauma and didn't get any healing, didn't go to therapy, didn't seek spiritual healing, didn't seek any perspective. It seems like those women are the ones with the microphone, with the blowhorn, like doing the loudest message. Because I'm just like, the way that these women is talked as if they literally chose like a beast from hell, and that's Black men. Like that's essentially what they're fighting against. Like the way that some of these words are, the rhetoric is used. And I'm like, this is your dad. You're talking about him. Okay, if black men are beasts or they're nakers, dusties, whatever, well, what does that say about you? You have their DNA in your body. And that's what I'm like, I don't think these women understand that at each moment you go and you demonize men, you are demonizing yourself, because nobody looks at a black woman and says, oh, well, you're from the white community, or you're from the Asian community, or you're from the Palestinian community. It's like, no, you're a black woman. They're looking at you from the black community, period. This is the way that we're being perceived. So we don't understand how we undermine even our own image when we go and we bash and we make it a sport to treat our men like they're beast. It's like I'm just like, are you not thinking? Like, what is going on here? So
that's one of the reasons, like when you talk about these, extreme feminists that are out there saying these crazy things like black men are bullet bags, that's one level that we deal with. But one of the reasons I talk about anti-black misandry is I'm more concerned about the baked in level contempt that is far more prevalent among the rank and file. And what do I mean by that? I mean, Torraine brought up color purple earlier. I grew up in an era where antipathy toward black men was normalized. It was accepted, and it was low level. And even Kevin used to talk about the low level of contempt, that the one-way aggression from black women to black men. That's what I talk more about, because I think that's more dangerous than the small few extreme feminists on Twitter. It's the everyday casual misandry that's acceptable, especially when it's applauded in media and it's supported in casual conversation, and it becomes the primary framework by which black women address black men in a public space. That to me is far more dangerous.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Real quick, I wanted to acknowledge, okay, I see a nail with the 5C. Black men need to reevaluate if this is the black community they want to be a part of. A division is needed among black people in line with like-minded people. I appreciate the 5 on the super chat. Yeah, I agree. I don't think we should idly sit by and just allow some of these damaging rhetoric or behavior to be done without any pushback. I do agree with that. Shout out to Deanie with the 5 on the super chat. I see. I personally never watched Kevin Samuels outside of viral clips, but I find myself defending him because I detest bullying the dead. It is obnoxious AF. Completely agree. It's like I said, even if you didn't agree with him, that's fine. And honestly, I would respect some of the main detractors right now who have everything to say about him. I think I would respect their opinion 100 times more if they're willing to have this level of smoke when he was alive. Some of these are the very content creators who are saying, don't watch his content, don't give him views, don't give him attention. Then all of a sudden that he's passed, you got all the attention in the world to dissect his videos time and time again. And to me, I'm just like, that is like weird. Would you want to be treated that way? Shout out to Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's Tashawn. It says, y'all can't let bro rest in peace. Yeah, no, that's what we're saying. That is what we're saying. And shout out also to AKs and Curtains with the 10 on the super sticker. Also, shout out to BGS Ibmore, I see in the building. And I love your content. My husband introduced me to your content. Really, really good, interesting stuff there. So guys, again, if you're here, get those likes up. Show support to this show. You can find me on Cash App, Venmo, Shade. Also, as mentioned, I will be sure to acknowledge those super chats. And y'all, hit that like button, y'all. Likes are free. So anyways, I wanted to make sure I got everybody. Also, I got Hakeem in the building. Shout out to Hakeem with the 15 on the Cash App. Hakeem, it's always good to have you here. So anyways, so I think you guys, like, again, what you said about the feminism and how it really, the in-baked black male misandry. I mean, I think you couldn't have said it any better. And even yesterday, Dr. Johnson, when I was looking at your live, and it was really speaking to me when you were kind of going over all the different avenues that, as you were mentioning, kind of like what was the word you used? It's like the presumed or the low-key contempt that women have, or that we're taught to have, even as young as a schoolboy. And from the teachers, from the different ways that black boys are profiled, and they're assumed to be lazy, or they're assumed to be uninterested, and not recognizing that, little Black boys generally have a different way of learning and a different way of understanding. And so it's like at that very age, we are taught, even as young girls, as like, oh, girls can do better, or girls are smarter, or this or this or that. And that develops and it grows over time to something that is so much more sinister. So I really loved how you brought it back to how it starts as early as like preschool. They can start there.
Well, and the thing about it is, I think the blowback from that legacy is Kevin Samuels, between Instagram and YouTube, had over 2.5 million followers.
Yeah.
Now, there's a reason that it's not just about entertainment. There's a reason for that. Men and women were keying into things he was saying and identifying with it. And there were so many examples of things that were noteworthy that needed to be discussed, that there was no other place that you could really find that would deal with it that way. You know what I mean? So as many people who seem to have so much hatred, it's like he didn't get 2.5 million subscribers out of nowhere.
He didn't. He right. And people often, they won't talk about the fact that he had a multicultural, even international support. It wasn't just Black men going over there supporting him and spending all their time bashing Black women. It's like, no, he had men of all different ethnic groups. He had women, married women, women, even single women who desired to be married. He had a diverse group of people supporting him because they recognized that maybe not everything they agree with, but the core message of what he was saying, men should have a voice. Men should have a seat at the table when we're talking at relationships. Like, it should be common sense, but it speaks to the society that we live in, where it's just been women talking unfiltered for so long.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, if you look at the ultimate irony, what was the demographic that called in the most?
Black women. It was Black women.
Yeah. There was nowhere else where Black women, look, I mean, they weren't going to be told their own foibles. If you go to the Steve Harveys, if you go to all these other dating coaches, they told them what they wanted to hear. The Derek Jacksons, because there's money in doing that.
There is.
Kevin was one of the first ones I saw that could actually tell them, from in a way that wasn't about, appeasing them. And they kept coming back because there was nowhere else to have that discussion, in that manner. So.
Right. And that's the thing about it, because who was it that I was listening to where they said it at the end of the day, he could speak unfiltered because he wasn't trying to lay down with them. He was like, I'm not gonna see you ever again. So it's like there was no need for him to try to butter him up or try to make him feel good. It's like, no, because if you really care about somebody, you're gonna tell them the truth. And it's not like he had to worry about, I'm gonna see them in work or the next day or whatever. It's like, no, this was his platform, so he could say whatever he wanted. And truthfully, now this is just my opinion, but I think one of the issues that we've had living in a culture that is very much misandrist is that, there's I think the fear and even the misunderstanding of masculinity, right? And I can think of this even when I look at some of my favorite sitcoms or different television series, where the men are oftentimes portrayed in very docile, compliant ways.
Yes.
There was one time I was watching the show with my husband. It's like one of my favorite shows, and this was his first time watching with me. And so, like 5 minutes in, he's just like, "Oh, this is made for women." I'm like, "What do you mean? Like this isn't that?" And he's just like, "Think about it. What man in their right mind would have responded like that?" And then he kind of broke down. He was like, "Okay, look at the way that in all the scenarios, what the woman was making decisions, there was no pushback. The woman was making decision, and the man just kind of went along with it. And then his life got better. A woman got what she wanted, but he didn't get what he wanted. Like, do you see what's going on?" And I'm like, I guess that's true. I never really put two and two together. It was just so nice and like flowery, but that was just one example. And there's many where even men. This isn't even Black men, just men. Period. Right, where they are kind of given this very like docile like persona, as if the way that you would talk to a woman. Like, you don't talk to a man the way you talk to a woman. Usually you talk differently, but you don't see it online.
But you know what though? I'm glad you brought that up, because you're right. this isn't just a black problem. This is a cultural problem in America where,
Yeah.
and I understand where it came from. Again, I think there are some good things that came out of feminism where it said that women need to have a voice, and I think that's important. But I think I think there's been such an overcorrection on that particular thing to
Yeah.
the point where if you are a man, that you can't even say anything, or if you are in some of these sitcoms or some of these shows, you have to be completely docile. A lot of
Yep.
what you see too is like where this idea where the man is completely ignorant or just sort of like this dumb, sort of like a dog that hangs around the house and until he
Right.
doesn't have any direction until the wife T speaks for him. If you don't, I know you may not want to say them out loud, but I'll say it. A lot of that started in the '90s, and then with Friends and with like Everybody Loves Raymond, and people in shows like
Okay.
that. Um, you know, I know people. People love Friends. I hate that show for a lot of reasons. Number one, first of all, because I've never seen that white of New York in my life, and second of all,
Fair.
that the character of Ross and people like that are some of the most emasculated milquetoast dudes I've ever seen in my life. And
Right.
also with Everybody Loves Raymond, you got a TV show where you got these two guys who act like they're 5 years old,
Right.
pushing around each other and everything, and they're still mad because somebody stole some ice cream when they were on the kindergarten playground, and they can't really have adult conversation until their wives get them together. That's a conscious decision that's been made when it comes to TV shows and everything. And that sort of stuff, even though it's done in a comedic form and done in like in a scripted form, that stuff goes into the mindset of people who watch this stuff. And these are shows that go on for decades that have like millions of followers every week. That sort of thing has been done by design. Where if you go back and look at TV shows, even black TV shows like All in the Family or Good Times, even though you had those scenarios set up where like you had buffoonery and it was done in a comedy mindset, they use
Mhm.
comedy to talk about real serious issues. And like
Right.
if you go back and look at like Good Times, even though the black father there was an impoverished family, everybody knew that James was the law in that household. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Whether he was working or not. You know what I mean? You knew that. How many people who how many people who were in their 50s and 40s said that James was their father figure because a lot of them grew up without one, but it was a good model for a lot of how men can raise their families, whether you were impoverished or not. And I think once you started seeing um, entertainment move away from the idea that you have to have a man and a woman to build a strong family to get through whatever your situations are, that's when you started seeing a lot of the stuff begin to move into the place where a lot of men have no direction and a lot of men have no way or no models to see what a man looks like. Because, especially in black communities, because the 80s and the 90s was the height of the crack epidemic. A lot of back in the 70s, a lot of the men who were controlling a lot of the black power movement and a lot of the women too were either killed outright by the state or they were in prison, and a lot of those movements were like dispersed. So all you had was like TV to really raise a lot of these people. And if you didn't have Bill Cosby, and if you didn't have a different world, if you didn't have like that renaissance of black entertainment that was written by black people started getting pushed back, and you had people who were non-black starting to write this stuff, and a lot of those shows got moved away. So you get stuff like um, I'm trying to think stuff like Harlem, like what we have now, because we're in a renaissance of black entertainment, but a lot of it is weak and milquetoast, and it doesn't speak to the community. It's black
Yep.
content written for white people by white
Yes.
people. This is what you
Bingo.
got.
If y'all don't,
The Black Comedy Sketch Show. I watched that for the first time a few weeks back, or I think it was the Black Female Comedy, whatever. I don't remember the name, but I watched it and I was just like, this is not. You can tell when it is a white writer, like trying to do black humor for white folks.
yeah,
Like you can tell.
yeah,
One thing you're right, but that I got to say something about that. A lot of what you got now, you got a lot of black writers who grew up that way, who write just like white people, and they're just as corny as white people. They've got some white people out here who write better black stuff than they do, and that's all I'll say.
well, if y'all don't support Torraine's channel, I don't know what to tell you. Y'all better go over there and subscribe. But one thing I would add to that is look how it evolved, because in the last 15 years, that's transitioned to action and drama, right? So now you have movies where women are inherently stronger and more capable.
Yep.
They're smarter. They're scientific geniuses. They're most powerful in the room. From kids' cartoons to Marvel movies, across the board, there's this new kind of aesthetic in place where this is the new dynamic. And this is something I used to say a couple years ago. My son, up till the age of 12, 13 years old, had never seen a male beat a female at anything in media up to the age of 12 or 13. And that's just the last time I asked him. He didn't actually say he finally saw it, but that's how prevalent it was. So you got a whole generation that's been raised with the idea of female superiority. And that's where we are. You can't see a male be smarter than a female or stronger than a female. And so the difference between what happens in media and what happens in real life, there's a lot of disconnect there.
That's
and there's nothing wrong. And there's nothing, and I think we need to point out just to people listening that there's nothing wrong with the idea of Black women being shown as strong and smart and intelligent. I think that's a very necessary thing. But there seems to be this idea that for Black women to be able to be seen that way, that Black men have to be decreased and shown as stupid and everything, and it doesn't work that way.
At the expense, it doesn't have to be at the expense of Black men. Absolutely,
right. Absolutely, could not agree more. Real quick, I see shout out to Ava with the 20 or no, the 1999 on the super chat. I see men on TV are either super docile or an evil villain. Yes, that is, I think, the only time you can usually see men being aggressive in their quote unquote masculine form is if they are villains or they're protecting women, like they're like military ops or working for the government, but they're essentially they're in the protector role. That's like really the only time I think it's okay for them to be in their masculine form.
Especially for Black men.
Yes.
Especially for Black men too. You notice the only time you see Black men who are being aggressive and expressing their masculine energy, they're either the FBI or the feds or a cop. You notice that in movies?
Right.
Oh, yep. My husband pointed that out to me, and he was explaining. Because it's like those are in control. They're in controlled environments where they're essentially working for the system. So that's not as much seen as a threat,
While they're being told in the effort to protect women that women don't need protection. So again, these for young boys, this becomes extremely confusing. Do I open the door for her? Do I not? Do I protect her? Do I let her fight on her own? These kind of things sound, they sound funny, but when you talk about how people learn how to participate in society and interact with others, these are confusing messages. Women say they want protection, but they cuss you out for doing so. So where do you go with that?
Looks like I'm.
Do we go dead?
Yeah, I think so. Look like her camera was moving for a minute.
We cut out.
Yeah, I think I can hear you now, Shay. Oh, okay.
Oh, it's all good. Get those likes up. Get those likes up. Get those likes up. I don't have a video of a sister dancing and everything in the money world, but get the sister Shay Shardae's likes up. Money world.
Oh, she must have had to go out to come back in,
Oh, okay.
But no, I wanted to, if I can be selfish here, man. Like I said, the video you did was fire, man. Kind of explaining that. Can you the Manosphere? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. This is the ironic thing about that. I did that video before I even knew that Kevin was sick or had a health event. I did it like a week or so ago. That was my relaunch of the new channel. I did that because I heard a lot of conversation about the Manosphere and the Black Manosphere specifically. And a lot of what I was hearing was negative because, again, some of the people that we were talking about on this live were the people who were saying we need to stop Black podcasts. We need to get rid of the Manosphere because all it is hateful and stuff. And what I wanted to do was kind of provide some history of why there was a Black Manosphere. And basically what I was saying is because Black men have been systematically shut out of every other avenue in academia and in like cable news. And every now and then we'll get like a spot on TV or stuff like that. So I said, what Black men have done is what we Black people have always done. We've made a way out of no way, and we've created a lane for Black men to speak to themselves and to their community, almost the way like it's almost taking the place of like old radio back in the days before Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act, where if you went to a radio station in your community, there was like a network of people who could go around and say, well, this is what's popping in Detroit. Well, this is what's popping in Atlanta. This is what's popping in LA. So I wanted to say that the Black Manosphere is basically taking on that role for the Black community right now. So that's what I did. So that's why I made the video.
Okay.
And I'm glad you said that because I had mentioned this a few days ago where going back to, I think, again, the misandrist culture that we're in, because oftentimes I've seen the Manosphere, even when I hear people referencing Kevin Samuels, right, and some of the people who follow him or who appreciate him, and so often they're like demonized, like a cult following or a cult group. And even Manosphere in general is kind of given this sense of just like cult-like crazy extremist behavior. Just, you know, these beastly men going around talking about women all day, plotting ways to be violent. And that's the way that men, the Manosphere, I think, has been portrayed simply for giving men a voice. Now, of course, there are extremist channels out there that nobody should listen to, right? On the men's side and even on the women's side. But I think the very fact that giving men a platform to speak is a reason to, you know, bring up words it's like cult-like or, you know, women hating or, you know, just all these things, again, speaks to the fact that I think at the end of the day, just some women are not, either they're not used to hearing men speak, they don't really want to hear men speak. They've not grown up in a scenario or a culture where they're used to the constructive side of love. Love is not hearing what you want to hear all the time. Love is not saying that you're a queen and you're a goddess when you're really inconsiderate and lazy and, you know, entitled. Love is telling you the truth. If you didn't ever receive that, or you weren't ever trained to understand that, you know, that love comes in different forms, and I think sometimes you can take these things out of context.
Yeah.
So
there's a spectrum, and you can find this in any human grouping. There's a spectrum where you have different levels of intensity, and really at the end of the day, this is a dialogue. I mean, the Manosphere is not a monolith either. You got, you know, this is look, this is the first time in my lifetime where I've ever seen this many Black men across class, across geography, across occupation, across color, height, you name it, who have so much to say and bring to bear on their own experiences. I've never seen this before. I've never seen this many Black men speaking out, and it's past due in many respects, and it's going to be messy at times, but it is what it is. There's no other dialogue I've seen that didn't have the same caricatures, that didn't get messy, that didn't have a spectrum, so on and so forth. The voices that rise out of that, we have to wait and see, but Kevin was one of them. And I think it was because he could operate across so many, you know, class frameworks that people were able to listen to him in ways that others may not get. So, you know, we're going to see more. And I think there's going to be a plethora of people speaking on different levels, from the academic to the street to the boardroom. You know, there's going to be more and more because this has been so stifled.
Absolutely. And so that's why it's not going away. And I think there's some women out there, you know, pulling tarot cards, praying to their ancestors, sending up prayers as if this is the end of men speaking up, and it's really not, and I don't think it should be. Real quick, shout out to Wisdom Bars with the $4.99 on the super chat. I see. Why do you think of his comment about what do you think of his comment about Black women being the bottom of the beauty standard totem pole? And he stood on that, which says a lot. I never, because like I said, I watched a ton of his content, and I never remember him saying that Black women, by the nature of being Black women, are at the bottom of the beauty standard or the totem pole. I actually did a video on this where I kind of break down the Black beauty standard, look at it from a historical perspective, and really break down what is considered beautiful. What he advocated for, from my understanding, was that beauty really is, you know, there is a scientific element to it. He kind of broke that down in previous videos. And at the end of the day, that men across the board of all ethnic groups generally want healthy, fit women, period. Now this changes, you know, Black men, I think, are the most body positive. Black men generally are accepting of more curvaceous women, prefer more curvaceous women, hence slim, thick. So there's that, but there's been many women, dark-skinned women with more ethnic features that he has considered 8, 9, and 10s, called them 8, 9, and 10. So he never said, Black women by nature of being Black, you're not beautiful. Now, what he did say is that if you're overweight, really, really, really overweight and obese, which Black women tend to bleed in that category, then that is going to impact your relationship, your relationship status, or that's going to impact, you know, how far you can go if you want a high value man, period. Because again, what we often forget is that he was really talking about the high value men. Those high standards that women complain about are women essentially saying basically 90% of the men are not on my level. So if you have already basically put up the middle finger to 90% of the men, and you're saying you're this high caliber of woman, you cannot be upset, or you cannot be, your feelings can't be hurt when the standards are not put on you. To me, that's just common sense. So
I need you to excuse me for one moment. I'll be right back.
Yeah,
Okay?
that's fine. That's fine. I know I've had some, you guys, please bear with me. I've had a few technical issues here, but I hope we're all, well, let me see. I think there was another super chat. I want to make sure I got everybody. Okay. Yeah, guys. So for those of you who are tuning in, please hit the like button. Oh, okay. Yeah, those are Torrenzo Jones. Shout out to Torrenzo Jones with the 10 on the super chat. Okay, so Mr. Neely Fuller said, in order to control the atom, confuse it and confusion and used as a weapon upon the masses from people that look nothing like us, granted some of our sellout via mind control. Appreciate the support. Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of people selling out and just doing things at the end of the day because they just want money. I think that's clear, and it's so unfortunate that someone's profiting has to be at the expense of other people. In this instance, are men.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of wait till Dr. Johnson came back, but well, welcome back, brother. I want to speak to what you said earlier. I've seen bits and pieces of that clip where they said Kevin was talking about black women are at the bottom of the beauty standard. Okay. I haven't seen it, so I don't want to speak on it until I'm fully educated on it. But I wonder if what he was saying, if he was talking about societal norms, or if he was talking about the way he personally felt about black women. Because if you look at the surveys when they talk about beauty standards and when they talk about desirability, unfortunately, a lot of times black women do end up on the bottom of those lists, not through any fault of their own, but because of the sample size of the people they speak to, which is mostly, I'm sure it's mostly white men or like Hispanic men with a few black men sprinkled in. So a lot of those men do feel that way. And if you're looking at the European ideal of beauty standards, a lot of black women do unfortunately fall into that category in the mindset of the European. That doesn't mean that we feel that way or that Kevin Samuels felt that way. This is just the way the society is set up. You know what I mean? And there is work to be done. And I think you're starting to see a little bit more work being done where we're talking about how black women are beautiful and body types are beautiful. But this isn't something that's even endemic to black people. If you go back and look through the early Renaissance and look at some of the paintings that were done by Peter Paul Rubens and by other painters in the early European Renaissance, the body ideal of women in that time was big, even with rolls and stuff. Go back and go pull them up and take a look at the pictures. There were big women that we would consider heavy or even a little bit overweight in the present day because resources were so scarce in Europe at that time, coming out of the Dark Ages and coming out of the Black Plague, that if you could afford to eat to the point where you could have rolls, that was seen as a sign of wealth and that was seen as desirability. Even if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, you see some of the same dynamics where if you were a big, heavy woman, that showed that you had enough resources to eat enough food outside of to have a surplus. So this is something that goes through, this is a historic context. We can't look at it from the narrow conflicts of what we have right now, just in this short, early part of the 21st century. Body images and body types and body ideals merge and they morph over time. So to say that he said that black women are at the bottom of a totem pole, that doesn't say anything that's really untrue if you look at the way European beauty standards are set up. Now, does that mean that black women are at the bottom of the totem pole with our men, or even with majority of people outside of our race? Absolutely not. But if you take those ratios and those golden means, yeah, I can see where that could be misconstrued. Now, to your other point about people keeping this division going for profit, that's absolutely the thing, and that's always been a thing. That's never going to really change until you have enough people pushing back against these narratives, until you get enough people in front of these gatekeepers to say that you don't speak for all black people. There is a majority of black people out here who feel a different way, and you don't control the narrative anymore. And that speaks again to something Kevin Samuels, I think, was a direct threat to. And this is something that I don't think people are speaking about enough, but I think it's very important lesson for black men and black women and black entrepreneurs. Kevin Samuels built an empire from 80,000 people for 3 years talking about fashion, talking about perfume, and talking about men's fashion, into a brand that granted over maybe 2.5 million people across every social media platform. And he did that with a mixing desk, a microphone, and a spinning stick because he had his personality. That shows you it's real though. That shows you the power that black people have with these platforms if we were able to monetize our own platforms and create our own broadcast companies and create multimedia companies for ourselves. I think that was a direct threat to the status quo as well, because a lot of the people who hate him had to matriculate through white media, and they had to come through white academia. So for this man to come up and go live every day and automatically pull in 500,000 people every time he turned on his camera, that shows you that there's an alternative media source out here, and there's an alternative media out here that people can latch onto to get the message across, and that scared them as well. And it's not just him. Kevin Samuels was the most polished ideal of that, but you got brothers out here who are doing that. Like, remember Kwame Brown? Kwame Brown started out sitting in his car holding his phone on a selfie stick and calling out Stephen A. Smith, and to the point where these are things people are doing this with no real production values, but because you have a message and you stand on your square, people respond to that. That's what I think is important as well, and that's something we could take away from Kevin as well.
Well, and it's a dangerous paradigm, right? Because what it suggests is that the hands of who has access, who has a voice, is no longer controlled by the corporate framework. They're no longer controlled by the Hollywood mechanism. Now, anybody with enough gumption, with enough creativity, and they can actually pull together their own platform and build their own system. That's dangerous in many respects.
Yes.
And whether you like Kevin or not, it's the precedent that his success sets that creates a concern amongst the establishment, because now anybody can actually do that. Not to say anybody can, but to say it can come from anyone if the right circumstances are in play, and it can't be dismissed easily by those who don't like it. And that's a powerful framework.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And one more point I want to make on that. I was on Roland Martin a couple of months ago, and he said something, and it's very true. If you look at throughout political history, anytime there's a coup or anytime you want to destabilize a nation, the first thing you do is you take out the military. The second thing you do is get control of the communication. Whether it's a small country in sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East, you get control of the radio stations, you get control of television, and you start broadcasting your own narrative. Kevin Samuels was outside of that, and he was sort of doing that in his own way, and he sparked a revolution that I think is not going to stop just because he passed. The message doesn't die because the messenger dies.
Yeah, I think in many ways it's about to get more expanded, because I think his death is definitely, people who didn't even know who he was are now looking into what's going on. Even if what they're hearing is negative, it's causing them to say, well, who is this Kevin Samuels? And what is this discussion? What is the context that he's coming out of? Because Kevin came out of a context. Kevin came out of discussions that Black men were having. So even though he's passed on, there are many more that have had channels for years, myself included. So you're going to, so that content is already there. It's not a matter of waiting for someone else to rise. The content creators have been there for years. Kevin learned from them. A lot of his talking points he pulled from other Black men. So the conversations have not stopped happening. They've been going on for years. And now it's just a matter of who else people can resonate with.
Absolutely. That's what when Mr. Obsidian had called in a few days ago, and he kind of talked about how he's that's one of the founding fathers of the Black Manosphere, and talked about the thing that kind of really inspired him and a few other men to really kind of lay the framework for what we're seeing today. And so because of that, because we know that Kevin Samuels, just his success was born out of a movement that had already been going on, we can't think that it's just going to go away. It's like the cat's out of the bag. And now I think just the timing of his passing and everything, this is just my opinion, but I feel like it almost gives this sort of martyr like, I guess, persona to a certain extent, because so many people loved him, so many people resonated with him, so many people thought he was bringing change, and it's almost like, man, at the height of your career, as things are really taking off, you left. So I think, because of those strong feelings, he was trending on Twitter like all day in the entire US. He definitely had his influence, and I think because of that, and because impact he had, that it's going to make him even that much more popular. And at the very least, if not him, I think it's now going to force the masses to reckon with the fact that men are speaking up, period. They're speaking up, whether you like it or don't like it, and they're rallying together. And I would argue that it's a good thing that men have created a space where they can come to the table and have us listen, And
now we have to actually incorporate that into our dialogues. Now it's just no longer a one-sided discussion about what Black men need to do to improve. Now there's another conversation that's happening, because it addresses everything from the higher level to the lower level. And I've been saying this for years. Kevin was not oblivious to higher level relationship issues, like, you know, how do we talk to each other? How do we do? He wasn't immune to that. He wasn't oblivious to it. He was starting at base one. He was starting with, how do you present yourself? You know what I mean? What is it you're expecting from someone else? People just limited him to this materialistic dialogue, but he was saying, no, this is base level. This is the beginning point of the discussion. This is when you see someone across the room that you're interested in. It's at that very level. This is how we need to reimagine even the first meeting. You know, what are your expectations for both men and women? And he was harsh on both.
Yeah, he was.
But here's the thing about the whole tone issue, which I've always looked at as a deflection from having to actually deal with what was being said. And, you know, I asked this on my show the other day. I asked the men, how many of you were talked to sternly by women in your life? Wives, girlfriends, mothers, grandmothers. And I just got a plethora of men, you know, just tell me, yes. Well, that's tone. You know what I mean? Sometimes tone is not something you feel like hearing, but at the end of the day, did you get something out of it? Did you bother to pay attention to what was said? And a lot of people got something out of it, because it was a real conversation in many respects, you know.
I think it's like, okay, can we just be honest for a second? Like, anybody who grew up in a Black family knows that tone is not necessarily the strong suit, period. If you had a Black mama or a grandmama or an auntie, nobody was walking around talking about, oh, did my tone offend you? That's not culture. Not to say it can't improve, not to say there's areas of improvement, but that's not the culture. So to all of a sudden act like what he's saying is so out of pocket, when you yourself probably, once you got off listening to him, was going and yelling at your kids, yelling at your grandkids, whatever. My mom told me, because I mentioned, you know, she's a teacher, and she's worked all K through 12, all, you know, grade levels, different environments, urban areas, suburban, in between. But she talks about all the time how anytime she'd work in the inner city, her tone had to change. And anytime she had to be cool or chill, they wouldn't listen to her. It was always, she always had to act a fool. She always had to yell to get people to listen. And so, and I was like, and this goes back to, I think, just culture. There's different reasons for it. So I think, to your point, that's cap, basically. This is a reason to deflect, because it's like, you all know, nobody in the Black community is growing up thinking about tone. That's not that's not what's happening.
Right.
And also,
go ahead, brother. Oh, no, go ahead.
And another thing about that too, you know, to the point about tone, I do think there is room for improvement in the Black community, that we do need to speak to each other in a more loving way. But the cold hard facts on the ground is that there are people who are not going to listen to you until you hit them with some harsh truth. Right. And also, Kevin's tone was really the way that men speak to each other. You know what I mean? If men, if you don't see a man who is in some visible trauma, usually we talk to each other like that when we're in the barbershop and when we're around each other. And women know this. Women know how when men get together at the house and they're watching the game or busting spades or something like that, we tell each other, man, shut the hell up. Man, get up off that stuff. You know, that's how we speak. And it's done, you know, now you can talk about the historical roots of that, but that's just the way we interact. You know what I mean? And it's still all love. Man, shut the hell up. Man, I'll hit you with this damn rock or something like that. You know, that's how we speak. There's a way that we speak, and Kevin didn't modulate his tone from women to men. And I think that's what women have a lot of issue with too. But if he did not do that, we might not be talking about him right now.
Exactly. And something Torraine said that's so incredibly important. It also highlighted the degree to which women set the standard for how relationship discussions are considered, right? What they're supposed to look like. Women have set that standard for so long that they're the only men that I've seen really enter that discussion are men that were able to adapt into women's modes of communication. And as he said, Kevin didn't play that game, which was something that attracted men to want to hear more. Men who didn't come into the Manosphere prior to that, they listened to Kevin for the first time and came back because he was also speaking in a tone that men could identify with, and he didn't kowtow to what the standard was. He actually made room for men to be men in the midst of the discussion, and that's not something we've had in the relationship industry, whether you're talking about films, whether you're talking about talk shows. We haven't had that.
Right. You know? All right. Absolutely. Real quick, I want to acknowledge Deanie with the 2 on the super chat. I see. Okay, he said what he said. So what? They called in. They did call in. That's why it's like I call Cat, because some of the stuff this complaining, I think, is just women wanting attention. Because you say, oh, don't listen to him, don't give him no mind, yada yada yada, and then you post about him every 15 seconds, or you call in. It's like if you really didn't care, you just wouldn't pay attention. So that's why I'm like, I call cap. Some of this is just, I think, certain people just wanting attention, really.
Yeah,
Okay,
he wasn't
let's
out
see
there
if
on the
we
street
can
with
go
a
on to
mic
the
running in
next
people's
one.
face.
No, not at all.
Let's see. Uh-oh. Is my network's slowing down again?
Okay, you want me to read it?
Can you guys hear me? I'm having this network today.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hear you loud and clear. Just he's buffering a little bit though.
Uh-oh. What'd you say?
Can you hear us? Uh-oh.
Mm.
Yeah, she might end up having to go out.
Yeah.
But no, you're
If
right.
you
Oh, go ahead.
No. You go ahead, brother.
I was saying you're right. He didn't have to bash people in the head to be heard. I mean, people wanted to hear it. And in terms of this whole high value man component, I think a lot of what people miss is that Kevin did not establish that. It was actually not only was it a term that had already been in the lexicon already, but more than that, this was something we heard from women for decades. I mean, again, being a child of the 70s and the 80s, I remember when six figures became a standard for what was considered desirable. That wasn't something Kevin introduced. You know, Kevin just said, okay, well, if that's what you want, then let's find out if you know what those men value. Have you talked to those men? Has it ever crossed your mind to ask what those men want? And night after night, you found people that had never thought about what men wanted, whether they were high value or otherwise. You had these long, and this is something I've even seen in my classroom. I'll ask the women, no, I ask the men, what are the lists and standards that are imposed on you or that you've experienced in the dating market? And even as young as 17, they have already heard that they're supposed to be making six figures. But more than that, they're supposed to be making six figures at 17 to be worthy of dating the girl they're sitting next to in class.
That's
The
crazy.
standards for height, the standards for having a car and their own place, they're in place in their first year of college. They damn near hear it in high school, but it's definitely imposed in college. When I ask the girls, what kind of standards have men given you? Silence, right? So there's been this one-way set of standards. And when Kevin would ask women, well, what do those men that you want? Because here's the reality. Overwhelmingly, what we saw night after night, as much as people may want to deny it, is how many women sought the same dude.
Right.
Yes. Start asking them questions, and you'll even hear some women, oh, I don't really care about money. Okay, well, what kind of lifestyle you want to live? Well, I want to have 3 kids and I want to travel the world. And I want to live in a nice big house. And Kevin will just sit there for a second. He'll be like, okay, so you want a 6-figure man. How much do you want to work? Well, I really don't want to work. Okay. So you got
but money doesn't matter. That's why,
Yeah. You got 3 kids, you live in DC, you don't want to work, and you're looking for a man. What other man you looking for? And then it would slowly come out, and he would coax it out of them sometimes because they wouldn't want, and then it would just come out. And it's like, well, clearly, this is not the 6-figure high value man didn't come from Kevin. It actually came from women. Women were the ones that required this early on. And so Kevin addressed it. And all of a sudden he became the face of it.
And another thing, go ahead, Shay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's crazy. The way you explain that. I didn't know that, but that makes sense. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, and another thing, speaking to your point, Dr. Johnson, there is. Let me preface this by saying this. I live in Atlanta, and Kevin was based in Atlanta, and we don't really have to talk about Atlanta. We know that Atlanta is the quote unquote Black Mecca. There's a lot of Black, successful, very well off, comfortable people in this city. I'm getting there, not there yet, but I hang around them. But here's the thing: when men who are quote unquote fit into the description of a high value man, men who really are really high earners and people who are in that social set, if they're out there looking for wives or companionship or even girlfriends, there are certain standards that they have that they're looking for if they're going to partner with somebody. And it goes beyond not even having money. There's a certain social standard. There's a certain way of behaving. There's a certain way of dress. There's a certain mindset that you have to have if you're going to be in those circles, because in a city like Atlanta, if you have a business, if you are working, or if you're in a certain certain social set, there's a very real possibility that you can be in rooms and you can be in events with very powerful people. You know, people who may run studios, people who run businesses, people who may work at the city hall, people who may run Georgia Power. I'm like billionaires like that for real. There is a lot. I think Atlanta has more influx of people where you have different classes that mix with each other, from the very high level to the people who are working at jobs and everything like that, and they mix and intermix with CEOs. If you're somebody on the fast track to a career, or you have a business, even in the hip hop world, because that's another stream of revenue, all these people kind of all blend together. And if you're going to be in rooms with these people, even on social levels, their partner is going to have to reflect them. And if you are not familiar with that lifestyle, and if you're not familiar with what that world is like, you're not going to get past first base with that somebody. A lot of times, you're not going to get past the first date, because a lot of times those dates are really applications. They're really job applications. And if you come in there, if you're a woman, and if you come, it's the truth. And if you come in there with an attitude, and if you come in there with this idea that you're automatically supposed to be catered to just because you are a woman, or because you look a certain way, you're not going to make it. And a lot of women who will call into his show would be, even if you take out the physical aspect, a lot of women who call into a show are very beautiful women on the stand, if we're looking at physical standards. But because their conversation sucked, or because their personalities, they were on a psychological level of an 18-year-old, they couldn't really have a solid conversation. And he talked about that on the show a lot. Like, if you're trying to meet high value men, you're going to have the mentality, and you're going to have the presence to be able to walk into the room and be introduced to his friends, and be introduced to people when they're cutting business deals, that sort of thing. Because all of those things affect that. If you're dealing with high value men, you're always hustling, you're always working, you're always negotiating. And if the people you're negotiating with look to your left and see the woman you're dealing with, and y'all don't match up, you're affecting that man's bottom line. And if both of those things don't match up, he's going to look at your intelligence. He's going to look at that man's judgment, and he's going to start going back and telling people, this is who he's dealing with. We don't need to deal with this dude. If you don't believe me, ask Will Smith. If you don't believe me, ask Will Smith.
Yeah. No, I did an interview with Kevin on my Institute for Black Male Studies channel, where I interviewed him about his life, and he learned that lesson directly. He learned that lesson with one of his relationships, maybe even his wife, or past wife, I'm not sure which, but he talked about how he was seen and how he was treated in the workplace based on her behavior at, say, company events. And so when he would talk about the importance of that, you know, where he would ask women, okay, you want this kind of man, have you grown up? He used to always ask the question, were you raised to be a wife? The reason he would ask those kinds of questions is because of just what Torraine was talking about. That is a real dynamic. Even as a professor, you know, when I go to the university and I'm participating in events and I'm engaging, you know, deans and provosts and presidents, who I'm with, how I carry myself becomes an unspoken standard or an unspoken issue, where it can determine just how far I can go in certain spaces on the basis of that. Whether you take that to the corporate world, the athletic world, the media world, these are how human beings engage. And Kevin was just one of the first to put it on the front table and say, this is real. Let's deal with it.
And people who are already in those circles, they know that, which is why they know that. So that's why I don't like when he's mischaracterized as having all these unrealistic standards for women. It's like, we're not talking about the fact that this is based upon women who have already pretty much eliminated 90% of the male population. It's like if somebody wants to be CEO at Google, right? They can't just wake up one day and feel like they do it. Like, there's a process you would have to go through to get to that goal. It's going to be very incredibly strict and stringent. So it's just like, people can understand this when it comes to maybe getting in certain careers, or maybe even getting into a certain college. They understand that, but somehow when it comes to relationships, the narrative has shifted to just take me as I am. And any ounce of a man saying, well, I have a preference too, is just seen as just, how dare you? You've broken the sister code. You've broken the misogyny, this and that. It's like, no, men have feelings. This was not complicated decades ago. Women kind of knew, you should try to keep yourself together. Like, this is basic stuff, not even anything complicated.
But but the other side to it too is what he had to inform people of. It would astound me how he would actually ask some women, okay, you want a six-figure man? What percentage of men would make six figures? And you would hear women say things like 75, 80%. and he would just kind of cock his head to the side. But those kind of moments were incredibly important because for the last 40 years, Black men especially have listened to these conversations. We've seen the movies, the films where all the critique was laid to Black men's feet, but nobody really pushed back or questioned the expectations that women had of men and whether or not they were realistic. So when you start to hear everyday women calling in, and these would be women that would be anywhere from on welfare to making six figures themselves, and they would come out of their own mouths with their own expectations and their own understandings of the world, and you got to see just what the climate was. And this is something I even tell, even though a lot of married people did get something out of Kevin's show, a lot of men that I've talked to as well who didn't like Kevin, I had to explain to them, you've been out of the dating market for 20 years.
Right.
Trust me when I tell you, and I only learned this because, you know, I'm a widower. So I was married for, a decade. I wasn't planning to be single again. And when I came back into the dating market, I was like, what the hell? Because when you're dating, you're dating in your early 20s, it's fun and games. When you come out in your 30s as a man with a career and you're trying to date, it's a different reality. Women are
It's a hellscape.
Huh?
You said a hellscape?
It's a hellscape. A lot of
I call it Valley of the Broken Dolls. But at the end of the day, but they're playing a whole different game because you're talking about the pregnancy clock. You know what I mean? You're talking about women trying to get houses. They're trying to be with men with careers. I wasn't ready because the last time I was single was in my early 20s. So it was a whole different reality. And so Kevin is speaking to this reality, and the expectations and standards are so ridiculous. But it's only recently that we've started to say that. So when these women would say, yeah, 80% of men make six figures, I should be able to get one. It's like, no, you're talking about less than 10%. And then you'd see this moment of, oh, really? You know what I mean? That they didn't get those moments from anywhere else. They didn't get them there. So
you said dogscape. I'm sorry, I couldn't get.
No, I didn't say dog. No, not dogscape. I said hellscape. It's sort of like Elysium, where everything's a wasteland, and there's like a satellite living up here, like hovering over the earth that you got to try to get to. Everybody else just have to pick up soup cans and try to figure out the best way they can.
It's like the Valley of Dry Bones.
You're in Atlanta, brother. Can you imagine what it's like elsewhere? I mean, I'm in Fresno, brother. Trust me, I'm in Fresno.
There's plenty, because there's plenty of beautiful women in Atlanta. I can't speak for Fresno, but Atlanta, there's pretty beautiful women.
Atlanta, you know what? I don't want to take the topic down another road, but Atlanta is a whole nother animal. You got some very beautiful people here. You got some very good looking men and women. But once you get past that, you start having conversations. That's when things start going down.
That's
like
when
this.
Things start going fair.
Yeah. And to be fair, it's that way for men and women. But yeah, it's a whole nother animal. I'm actually doing a video about it later on, so I'm gonna be quiet.
Okay, I'm gonna have to. You guys definitely be sure to support the channels. Really, really great content also at Mr. Walker's channel. I think the moderator shared. Okay, real quick, I wanted to finish a shout out. I was doing that and then I got disconnected. Oops. Okay.
Oh, Shay, just so you know, I may have to take off in a couple minutes or so. So just
that's fine. I was gonna try to get a sense of where we're tracking with time anyway. So no, totally understand. But anyways, I want to give a shout out to Kevin C with the 5 on the super chat. I see it. It's not just looks; it's the whole woman concept. Intelligence, responsibility, compatibility, and personality count. 2, looks is just one area. Could not agree more. I know you spoke to that, Mr. Walker, some of the issues you have in the Atlanta dating market. So right. Okay, let me see. And then on to you guys, I'm sorry, you'll have to bear with me. I've had some my internet's been really kind of wonky today. Everything's behind, so thank you for bearing with me as I kind of stumble through this sketchy. Also, shout out to Wisdom Bars with the $4.99 on the super chat. I see. Okay, I want to see a poll at some point if the men in the manosphere would actually get with a Black woman, because most of the space says the community is done. Appreciate the love and the support. Interesting. I mean, we already know what the marriage rate says. I'll be curious to see maybe over the next decade or two if we're going to see a dramatic shift. But I think, I don't know. I mean,
so can I respond to that too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is the thing. So you have this within the manosphere. There are multiple movements. You know,
Yeah.
Ibmore, SYSBM, MGTOW. There are multiple movements, and so it's not a monolith at all, even ideologically. And
Yeah.
one of the movements that this person might be referring to is something like SYSBM, Save Yourself, Black Man, which is often associated with men traveling abroad to find different types of women. But here's the thing. What I've seen a lot of, and I haven't seen any studies on this yet, but what I've seen a lot of is men who are searching out women from different cultures. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're avoiding Black women. Many of them
No.
are finding
Yeah.
Black women from other cultures, the Caribbean, Africa, Europe, so on and so forth. And here's the thing about it that a lot of people miss is because I've been in the activist community, the conscious community for decades. When you're talking about the most hardcore, revolutionary, nationalist Black man, and I'm in Africana studies. These are the brothers that are teaching in the field. Do you know how many of these men since the late 80s have been marrying African women, Caribbean women? At the end of the day, this issue of looking outside of African American culture is not, it wasn't invented by the manosphere. It's been around for quite a while. There have been whole groups of men that have been talking about this. I mean, again, when I looked up after my wife passed and I surveyed 29 to 30, I think it was 29 of my male associates, overwhelmingly out of that 29, only 2 were with African American women. And there was never a sit down, there wasn't a discussion, and none of them dated less than 50 women from high school to adulthood. But overwhelmingly, I started to see these men going elsewhere. Now, what am I saying? Well, I'm saying simply that it's not purely just a racial matter in terms of that, in terms of white and Black, because that's the assumption we hear that Black men just want white women. That's not the case. If you look at Dataclysms by Christian Rudder, who covers over 1 million different couplings that took place on OkCupid, and you look at the data behind that, at the end of the day, there are a lot of motivations behind how people couple. Looks like we lost her.
What is she?
But but still, what it comes down to is, you have people that couple beyond across culture, but not necessarily across race. So.
No, absolutely. That's what I actually did. I've done some content on that because I've seen different detractors come in and say, "Oh, well, all these Black men are promoting SPM and promoting marrying white girls and yada yada yada." Kind of as a way to just push whatever misandrist message they have. And upon my research of SYSBM, there are certainly some out there who do not want to mess with Black women, but the majority that I saw were still wanting to be with Black women. They were just opening up their options to it being outside of the US. So I can attest to that. I even have a few of my members who are married to Black women, just, maybe from Dominican Republic or, Africa, things like that.
Oh yeah, it'll confuse you when a brother send you a picture from Brazil and she just as chocolate as the next woman here in Cali. And it's like, okay, now what? Now how you going to
because it's like people forget. I mean, if you want to go there, I think Brazil has like one of the biggest African populations outside of
Brazil has the biggest African population outside of the diaspora, outside of Africa.
Yeah. So and so you go like, I remember when I went to Colombia, I was surprised at the amount of Black people that I saw. Because on media you kind of see things portrayed a certain way, but you go to those nations and you found out that we're there. And if you understand actually what happened in the Atlantic slave trade, I guess it really shouldn't be that surprising.
Oh yeah. But that's just real quick, that's something Kev would talk about all the time. He said men will go down in beauty for cooperation and peace.
Yes.
And that's really what a lot of these brothers are looking for. Yeah, beauty is always there, sex is always there, but a lot of the discussion amongst these men is about peace.
Absolutely.
That's
a very good point. And I got to run, but I do want to finish up with this note. The majority of Black men want a Black wife. The majority of Black men want a Black partner, whether they're from America, whether they're from the Caribbean, whether they're from even Europe or Africa. If you look at the statistics, 93.8% of Black men who are married to a Black wife. And I think that's the goal for most of us. I think what has to happen is we have to get out of this idea that the people who speak against Black men and the people who have control of the mic and platforms in academia and in media speak for all Black women. The majority of Black women, first of all, a lot of these conversations that we're having, even though they're important, the majority of Black people around the world aren't really talking about this stuff because they're trying to get to their day-to-day lives. And if you talk to a lot of Black women, a lot of Black women want to be partnered with a Black man. And just like a lot of Black men want to be partnered with the Black women. The thing is, we got to get a lot of this toxicity and we got to get a lot of this propaganda that we've been fed to each other out of the way so we can come to a meeting of the minds and have an understanding of what we both want and how to respect each other. And once you move some of these people out of the way, a lot of these gatekeepers, I think that could happen. And I think Kevin was a harbinger of that. The last thing I want to say this is, you're absolutely right, Dr. Johnson. You know, attraction is physical, but it's also relative. And if you go to any block, you go on any block in Black America, you will find women who are considered heavy or considered, for lack of a better term, out of shape, but they always have boyfriends. They've been married for a decade.
That's facts. That is so facts.
Yeah, just follow, just go with me here. You can see women who are built like a lizard who always have men and they always have dudes trying to get at them. Why? Because of their personality, because of their personalities, because of their mentality, and because of their spirit is really positive and welcoming and inviting, and men that appeals to men. Now, look from the outside looking in, it may look like it's a little bit off, but when you start talking to people, you understand that. And how on the flip side, talking about Atlanta, I know women who look like models who look like they walked out of a magazine, who cry themselves to sleep in an empty bed at night, and they stay in therapy because no man wants to be around them. Hey. A brother who worked a brother in hip hop who I really admire, Uncle Luke, said something to me one time. I know y'all gonna say, yeah, Uncle Luke said this, but if anybody would know, he'd know. He said that a lot of men marry a face and body and wake up in hell every morning. That's crazy. That's real. Men want a partner who they can build something with, and they want a partner who's going to be on one accord with them. That doesn't mean they want a yes woman. That doesn't mean they want a punching bag. What a lot of men want is cooperation, and they want respect. And if you're trying to go to a goal, they want somebody who's going to be their partner, not a hindrance. And I think the same is true for women. So once we understand that, and once we get some of these bitter, hateful people some therapy out of the way, who in some therapy sessions, or get snatch the mic away from them, or we build more people in the manosphere, or even in the Black woman sphere, you know, for lack of a better term, who are speaking to each other with respect and love, I think we can really achieve something. But it's going to be difficult, but the work has to get done. And with that, I got to bounce. Thank you for having me on, sister.
No, I appreciate you coming in.
What's up, brother? Much respect. And I want to say much respect to your work, brother. I see what you're doing, and I love it, man. I want to keep going and supporting you as much as I can. You both.
Oh, likewise, brother. Good to see you, man.
Thanks for calling, guys. Be sure to check out his channel. I think moderators, if you can drop it into the comments. Be sure to check out his channel. Great content there. Thanks for calling in. You are welcome on anytime, as you know.
And in the words of my brother, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Shout out to the FBI. Shout out to the CIA. I don't have a spinning disc, but I'm gonna do this.
Right. You have a good one.
You too. Peace and love.
Okay, Dr. Johnson, how are you trucking on time? I want to be mindful.
I'm good. I'm down to help you. You let me know what you want to do.
Okay, so I have a few more questions I'd like to get through to get your perspective on. I'll try to I won't keep it too long. But let me get to these super chats. I've been doing that for the last 20 minutes. So I got Uncle Lock with the 10 on the super chat. I see KS comments about beauty was directed at modern Black females who we know don't smile. He spoke on internationally beauty standards. Only 20-30% of Black females fit into international standards. Again, I broke this down. If you guys want to get really nitty gritty on Black beauty standards, I did a video I did a few months ago where I looked at a few different peer-reviewed studies, different sources that really looked at Black beauty from a historical perspective. So I encourage you to check it out. Kevin Samuels is mentioned in there if you guys want to get really geek out in that stuff. I have resources in the description section also. But at the end of the day, we have to remember again, Kevin Samuels was speaking to people who had already, women specifically, who had already disqualified 90% of the male population. So we have to start there. Mm-hmm. You cannot be mad at a person. If they have already said that I am the cream of the crop, if this is what they are saying by their very actions, then when expectations are put on them, that's not, misogynist. That's not unfair. That's what it means if you are trying to be in this upper echelon high level. There's standards that come with it. Now, a shout out to Reggie, Packer fan man with the 5. Okay, I see. I remember watching The Fresh Prince years ago, and Hillary, the quintessential modern woman, told a man he had to make 6 figures. Gosh, The Fresh Prince. I used to love that show. I don't remember that particular time, but I wouldn't be surprised because I remember Hillary being her personality.
Absolutely.
So that's not surprising at all. Shout out to MS Delta guy. It says, hey Shay and the panel, always good to have you here. Thanks for showing some love and some support. I think there was another one I want to make sure I get. Let's see. Shout out to Dealing the Real with the super sticker. Much appreciated. And then shout out to Kevin C. We got another member, Kevin C, in the building. Says, it's unfortunate that woman used tone as an excuse to dismiss Kevin Samuels' legitimate criticisms. It hurts women's ability toward improvement. I could not agree more. One of the things that he said consistently was that he was not a therapist. He was not a pastor. He was not a motivational speaker. He was an image consultant. So when you go to a consultant, you cannot be upset when he gives you an assessment. That's their job. So it's like, that's why I'm like, no matter what angle you look at his content from, we can all maybe take personal issue with a couple of things, but I think the overall premise of what he was saying was completely valid, given the fact that women are calling in wanting the top 10% of men. Women are calling in wanting essentially all these luxuries that are really uncommon for the average person. Women, they've already established their standards. So it is completely valid. They call in to get an assessment from an image consultant. It's completely valid for him to give us an assessment. It's like, if you don't want it, don't call in or pay money and do it privately. So again, shout out to Kevin C. And then also shout out to MS Delta guy with the 5. And the super sticker, always showing love and support. Let me see. Here's one, Dealing the Real. It says, what's really disappointing about the untimely passing of Kevin Samuels is the abrupt end to the moves that he was making. He was planning to arrange a sort of meet and greet to bring people together. There's a lot of people that I think are stunned, saddened, whatever, but I truly believe this is kind of something else. You're gonna have people take his message or take what he was able to do and make that into their own thing. I don't think there's ever going to be another Kevin Samuels. Dr. Johnson, you correct me if I'm wrong if you think otherwise. I don't think there's ever going to be another him, but I do think there's going to be other men, maybe even other women who are going to take what he represented and really try to use it to maybe create change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we also have to keep in mind too, Kevin is in the process of becoming an icon. Like for example, if you look at Tupac, it's a difference between saying, well, I wish he did another album when he was alive versus what is the legacy of Pac after he died. He went from being a rapper that people would argue about in terms of how good he was to being an icon. And so here we are now, here we are, a couple decades later, and people are still talking about Pac.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean? Because he became an icon. And I think to some extent, may not be the same way. That's what's going to happen with Kevin. You're going to have people who are talking about him because of the legacy of his work. But the fact that he's gone makes everything he did that much more important, because we're not going to get another show. We're not going to get another episode.
Yes.
So what we have in the archives is it. And that's going to, so he's an icon now.
I agree. And I mean, I even saw people, be like, man, that was my nightly routine. I'd get home, I would, get in my PJs or whatever, and I'd turn on YouTube. Like that kind of became, how like it used to be, you would turn in for TGIF. For me as a kid, that's what I used to do. You turn into your favorite sitcom. It was like, I'm tuning into Kevin Samuels. So people are going to miss that. And again, I think that the very fact that he's no longer with us is going to make it that much more impactful,
Right.
So see, Slim Daddy, it says, just like our children represent the family to the community, your wife represents you to colleagues and potential business partners. Yeah, right. No, that again, if you're talking about those high value circles, I think that's when marriage really does become much more political, especially people with money and resources and assets. It's not just lovey-dovey. Like there is a huge political component behind it when you're talking about managing large assets or legacies or portfolios, it does become a lot more, I think, political than what women, I think, are even taught to understand. I think there was one more question or comment, or maybe I made that up. Okay. Oh, shout out to the kosher clinician. It says, shout out to Dr. T. Hasan Johnson and Shay. Please check your inbox. Was trying to contact you about a show. Okay. Got it. Y'all, sometimes, you have to bear with me, guys, in the email. It says, in Miss Delta Guy, there is a massive cognitive dissonance. Yeah, absolutely. I think speaking to some of this behavior that we saw on the show. Mm-hmm. So, a lot.
I think you got at least one more.
Okay.
I think it's one by. Did you get the one by Deanie? I think that's how you pronounce his name. Or
that person? Deanie! Shout out to Deanie. He's going to be on show Atlanta tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Icon. Mm-hmm. Oh, so they're going to okay, they're gonna do like
he's on. I don't know if you saw. Did you see the trailer for he's they show clips of him in the show, and it looks really intriguing. But I'm gonna tell you, if the numbers go up dramatically, and I think they will, it's gonna say a lot for this whole issue, this whole conversation amongst Black men.
Crazy.
It's kicking into the mainstream is what's happening. And so the mainstream is coming in trying to find voices that it can resonate with. And so Kevin opened the door for a lot of people, and then he would bring people on his platform he didn't have to bring. I mean, if you really knew how much money Kevin made to get his attention or to have him shout you out, if he charged, which he was well within his right to do, it would have been ridiculous. And so him bringing me on the show, he didn't have to do that at all. And just to be clear, as far as all these rumors about him being broke or this or that, the lead attorney here on YouTube has a very popular channel. And he said when he had 20,000 subs, he was making $10,000 a month. 20,000 subscribers on YouTube, no other platforms, just YouTube. He was making $10,000 a month. Kevin had 1.4 million. Do the math.
Right. That's people that cap. It's total and complete cap. I mean, just the super chats alone, with how people pocket watched.
Right.
If you went and pocket watched his super chats alone, not even going through Instagram, not even thinking about his private consulting business, and the amount of hours that he worked, and even people who knew him talked about he worked, no way the guy was broke. Like, that's total cap. So just another way to try to undermine his image and what he was actually about.
Yeah, but he shouted a lot of people out, gave out a lot of attention to others. He shouted out books, he shouted out songs, he shouted out people's work. So there's a lot there, and there's a lot of space for someone else or a lot of other people to stand up and speak.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then shout out real quick. I see Darren sent through a 10 on the Cash App. I do appreciate it. And then also Nicholas Morgan, who sent through a 10 on the Cash App. I appreciate the love and the support. So, okay, so I wanted to get, because I had at least another question or two I wanted to get your perspective on. Like I said, there's been so much to unpack here. You've dropped so much knowledge and a lot of interesting perspective on this. So I do appreciate you being here. So I want to segue a little bit into this whole question of the Black male image, because we know that is something largely that Kevin Samuels represented. Not only just the voice of collective men. Like I said, you had men of all ethnicities who can resonate with him, but specifically Black men, right? Who we know historically have been marginalized in so many different ways. He represented that. He brought a level of dignity and class to a Black male image that we have not seen in a very long time. So in your opinion, how do you think the image of Black men in the media could be restored or repaired after his passing? Do you think it's possible that that's going to happen? Is it going to have to happen outside of the mainstream media? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely think it's going to have to happen outside of mainstream media, and I think it's going to have a lot to do with media that Black men create and control on their own, which is another reason this whole issue sets a precedent. Because again, even if you didn't like Kevin represented a grassroots movement of millions of people interested in somebody because of their talent, their flair, their charisma, and their own independent platform. Many of us content creators, and Shay, you know this, You just get a camera, you get a mic. It may cost $100 for both, if not far less than that. Some people just use their smartphone, they drive around in their car, and they build platforms off of that. You know what I mean? So to be able to do that is incredibly important. And if we can actually organize a lot of that and start to create media in a much more intentional way, which I think this is evolving into, there's a lot to be said for resurrecting the Black male image on Black men's terms rather than on others' terms, who have a vested interest in creating imagery at the expense of Black men. And so I think there's a lot of potential for that. I think Kevin is one of the people that really kicked in that door to leave that space open, and he demonstrated a great degree of that. So there's a lot of potential there. It's just a matter of how it's interpreted and how people choose to move forward. But if you want to limit this, you didn't like his tone, you didn't like what he said, if you want to really, if you ignore everything else that was done and limit it to that, you're welcome to, but you're missing out on a lot of the conversation that goes beyond the obvious.
So you make a great point, right? How this could open the door for Black men to be empowered and to have seen how, with the right personality, tenacity, whatever, you really can create and control your own message. In the event this whole idea really continues to grow and you do really see Black men as a collective going and starting to create a message in media that is done on their terms, do you think you would start to see a larger collective of Black women support that? Or do you think there would be a concerted effort to continue the gender war?
Well, I think you're going to have both to some extent, but I'm seeing more and more women coming into space, and they're finding their levels. I mean, obviously, some people, they can't jive with, and others they can, and that goes across the board. I've seen some of the most outrageous guys in the space, and they'll still have their female listeners.
Yeah,
and you would imagine that he would have female listeners, and she's right there banging with him, and and it happens at each level. I have a certain audience where there are certain women listeners that are regulars, and I see them on a regular basis, and it's all love. So I think that's going to continue. I think it's going to grow because at the end of the day, I think there are some women that actually have been waiting to hear men's voices. And as they hear them, they're more welcoming, they're more willing to listen, they're willing to engage, even if they don't entirely agree. And then you have some that don't want to hear men's voices at all and want you to get on their program, and that's it. So you're going to have that split. But I think more and more women are coming into the space wanting to know, because at the end of the day, as you said earlier, I believe, women want to be in relationships. They want to be engaged. They want to deal with Black men. They want to, but for in many respects, many didn't grow up with fathers. They didn't grow up in an environment where they learned how to even communicate with men, how to understand men. The opportunity is now on the table for that to happen. And some women see it for what it is and are willing to get in it. Unfortunately, other women tend to, dismiss them, call them pick-me's, things of that nature. But, I think some women just want to actually engage men,
Which I'm like, if you were a heterosexual woman that's attracted to men, you should want to engage men, period. So I'm like, I don't. To me, some of his stuff was so common sense. It's just like, how is this even an issue? If you want a man, how is it hard for you to understand that if you desire to be in a relationship, then the perspective of the person that you want to be in a relationship with matters.
Right. It's amazing to me that when he would push back and say, well, these are the things women want, even some, feminist men would say, well, that's just ridiculous. That's just sexist, or that's just, that's misogynist that you would tell a woman she needs to lose weight or do this or that. But like, we got 4 decades of women having 20-point lists of what men need to do. And you're going to come at the man who for 2 years suggested that getting in shape might be a good thing. Really? That to me is how you can tell there's a disingenuous argument taking place. Because I literally grew up hearing these things. I grew up in a family full of women. So I not only saw it on TV or on the film screen or in literature, I also heard it amongst the women themselves. I heard it amongst the teenagers and the preteens who were talking about in middle school and high school what boys need to have. I'm hearing it coming from each.
That's crazy. You said preteens?
I mean, and a lot of guys can attest to this. When you're in middle school, the cute girl that everybody wants is dating somebody in high school. When you're in high school, the cute girl everybody wants is dating somebody in college. You get to college, the cute girl everybody wants is dating a grown man who owns homes and has property and has a business. It is what it is. You've heard this your whole life. So when you finally get to the point where you're almost 50 years old, you hear a man tell women, well, we would like for you to lose a little weight and be more cooperative. Oh my God, how dare you? And it's like, what? Really? I've been hearing for decades all this shit, and you telling me that that's a problem? Wow, that's deep. So.
Right, but again, that goes back to the messaging. Messaging is very, very distinctive for men and women, and I would argue, this is my opinion, but I would argue, I think based upon everything between the media and what's being portrayed, oftentimes being targeted towards women. Just consumerism in general, we know, is targeted towards women, and we live in a culture where so much of the messaging, so many of the things that we're being bombarded with, are towards women because women tend to consume more. I think that means sometimes we grow up in an environment where we're just, quite frankly, we're flattered, sometimes to a fault. And again, as you know, Mr. Walker had pointed out earlier, I do understand wanting to create an environment where Black women are treated with respect and not treated just according to the stereotype. And so I understand that movement and wanting to create that environment, but it's so toxic when that movement is, again, at the expense of Black men. And it's also even more toxic where women are given all these flattery words, but then men, they don't have, that doesn't happen. Men, there is no flattery. Men at a young age are kind of forced with the reality of, this is what it is. This is where I rank in the hierarchy. Men know that really early on.
Oh yeah. You learn that early, and again, going back to high school, if you were the 16-year-old without a car, you learned the difference between what a car had and what a car brought you and what not having a car brought you. You know what I mean? You had to deal with those stark realities, and you really couldn't delude yourself about it.
Right. Absolutely. So I did see, real quick, where did it go? I saw one super chat come through. I wanted to make sure I acknowledge. It was Wisdom Bars. It said, that's the problem. They were looking for relationship advice from a cologne salesman. That would be like asking the Batman actor how to fight crime. I know Kevin Samuels had gotten a lot of controversy because of his past, or because of, he'd been married and then had been divorced. But I think it was Mr. Obsidian who said this, where it's just like, okay, if we want to do tit for tat, if we look at the majority of the people who are leading the relationship sector, Oprah Winfrey, right? Ayanna Van Sant, who's another one, April Mason. A lot of these people who have driven or talked about relationships or whatever, Lonnie Love, they're not any more or less qualified necessarily than Kevin Samuels. This Kevin Samuels, had been married for some time, so it's like, if we're going to be tit for tat, then it's like nobody really in the relationship. Look, even Derek Jackson, he was the one leading it for a long time. A lot of men hated him, but he was leading it, and he was doing the very things that he was judging all these other men for. So nobody has the high moral background, standing when it comes to the Black and dating and relationship market. So because of that, he was very well qualified based upon the people that we see already controlling the narrative.
and again, it's one thing if you're talking about like formal television or Hollywood, where you got people promoting you. There's millions of dollars put into your promotion.
Yeah.
This is the dude on YouTube that expanded through word of mouth.
Literally,
So all that said, there had to be
YouTube.
There had to be fire to that smoke in terms of what people were drawn to. And I don't, I think if you're one dimensional, then you can't do more than one thing. But many of us have multiple skills, and I think he obviously brought more to bear than that. But the thing about it too, in terms of relationships, where I try to take Black male content is to actually look at the base environment that a lot of this comes out of. And so when you're looking at such a situation, to me, you got to go back to policy. So if we're going to talk about relationships, at some point, we got to look at what are the things that influence us. If I know getting married might cost me half of my resources, if I know family courts are more than likely to not consider me for, say, custody, or going to, hit me pretty hard when it comes to alimony or child support, those become decision-making factors that influence what I do. And that's just one institution. We can talk about several others. That's where a lot of the men's dialogue is moving to. It's going beyond. It basically starts from our experience, and then it begins to move out into the environment, and our analysis gets more and more in depth in that way. And I think that's what's happening, and it's a missing part of the dialogue. So men are talking, and we're moving beyond the surface, beyond the obvious, and we're getting to the core issues. And if you get to that, you'll understand men's behavior.
Right, and you know what, I like how you brought up the whole policy piece of it, because so often, very often, when relationships are talked about, at the very least in the female specter, policies never really ever come up. Well, maybe with the exception of, this whole Roe versus Wade thing. Mm-hmm. Now everyone was talking about that. But when it comes to, a man and woman coming together legally under marriage, the repercussions, the possibilities of what could happen, that never, ever comes up. It is always relationship compatibility. Does he make enough? Yada, 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 yada. But the reality is, for most men, and I think it's because this isn't always the case, but in many cases, men end up being taken just to the cleaners, for lack of a better term, when it comes to if there is a divorce settlement, what happens?
Yeah.
Oftentimes we hear that a lot of them end up really being out of a lot of money. Of course, that's what men's thinking about, and it's so crazy to me that consideration is never brought up at the very least in these women's spaces, because it's a driving concern that men have today, many of them.
Oh, absolutely. Even going back to the 1980s, the going critique was that men didn't want to commit. But here's the thing: if from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s, if you make anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000 a year, mm-hmm. and you got to lose half of that, if you make a couple million, you got to lose half. You're gonna be pissed. But if you make 25 or 20 and you got to lose half, it's a problem. So men became very concerned, and you'll notice the numbers started dropping off in 1965.
Really?
For Black men, more than any other group, we were the canaries in the mine, in the coal mine. So, a lot of this is in response to policy. A lot of our dating and mating behavior is in response to policy. And so I want people to understand more and more of that, because it explains even when, the behavior of women that Kevin was exposing comes out of very particular practices. If you've been supported in a way where you have advantages and access, even if you're poor, if you get welfare access that men don't get, if you're middle class, if you get college access that men don't get, it's going to promote a different set of ideas, a different worldview, different set of entitlements that stand in place that men are not going to be able to identify with, because we live a different reality. Those dynamics affect how we talk to each other, what we expect from one another, and how we engage in relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, if I don't want to be alone, I want to have some companionship from time to time, but I don't necessarily want to marry. That's going to determine how I interact with women. These are not. It's not rocket science. It's just a matter of understanding the way the environment shapes human behavior, and that's the level of analysis that we're trying to get to. But that's why I say the manosphere is a spectrum. You got brothers talking about it on every level, and the mainstream is really now just finding out. And so they're coming in to see what's being talked about.
Yeah. No,
but
and
I'll tell you what'll trip you out is men all over the world writing you when you become a content creator. I got brothers from Australia, from South Africa, from from China. You'd be amazed how many men around the world can identify with the things we're talking about, and they themselves have not had voice. So it's interesting.
I see one says lead attorney. Says majority of men, 75% lose their net worth. Oh, says majority of men lose 75% of their net worth in divorce. Ooh, that's deep. That is deep. Yeah, because I know a lead attorney, I think he did primarily family court for some time. So that's crazy. And like I said, with those kinds of numbers, it's almost ridiculous that is not, at the very least, if it's not the forefront of a conversation, that it is, it's largely incorporated into the relationship conversation, because men do have, not only from a legal standpoint, there's so much to risk. You add on top of that, the modern standards where it's like modern for women, right? But traditional for men, right? Where it's okay for a woman to decide to be traditional if she wants, or to decide to be modern if she wants, but men have to be traditional. Men, there is never a scenario of like, oh, do I want to be, I don't know, a stay-at-home dad, or do I want to not make as much? Do I want to have my passion job that doesn't make six figures? It's like, no, men are expected to provide, period. It doesn't matter what you do. You just have to provide. We don't want to hear your complaints, or else you're lazy. Women, though, we have the opportunity to be a stay-at-home if we want, be a boss babe, work part-time, but still love ourselves. And so it's like, it's not really a fair exchange. It's not a fair discussion.
No, it's difficult. And then, and just even if you look at it on a somewhat emotional level, right? When would you say girls start thinking about marriage and having kids? What age would you say they are?
Oh gosh. I mean, I can say for myself, anecdotally, I mean, between Barbie Dream House and stuff, different cartoons. I mean, that stuff starts when you're like a girl, you're a little girl, you're playing Barbies, you're in grade school.
Exactly. So if I marry a woman who's been thinking about marriage since she was, what, 5? Is that safe to say?
Yes, 5, 6.
So, okay. So what is the likelihood that I'm going to fail this set of expectations that she's been building on since she was 5? And if I fail her expectation and she has the capacity to use different institutions, not only for her own well-being and the well-being of the children, but partly out of revenge, you know, she has those abilities. I can't stop her from doing it. She's frustrated at me at the extent to which I couldn't make this lifelong dream she had come true the way she imagined it. For men, the cost benefit, analysis comes to that. Like, what's the likelihood I can live up to this idea? And what am I seeing happening with other men? I mean, I had a brother reach out to me last year who was saying, my best friend's wife sent him to jail. She created a false accusation because he came home late from dinner for dinner, and she assumed that he must have had an affair. So she called the police. She fabricated on her own husband, and he ended up going to jail. Lost his business, all of that. So again, these are the kind of cost benefit analysis that men have to make to decide, is it worth it, and can I endure what could happen? These are all relevant considerations.
I just report. Actually, I'm dropping a video about it yesterday, where a woman accused her husband of abusing, of physically and sexually abusing their kids, and put all these illicit photos on his phone, framed it.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to try to frame him and throw him in jail. Now, luckily, it backfired.
Right.
But I just, to me, the very thought that was the fact that they thought that they could get away with that,
right,
to me speaks to the fact that this whole conversation, even when we think about violence, when we think about domestic abuse, we think about the different things that impact kids in the family. There's a message and there's a picture that we all have, and it's usually not women, for sure. It's usually Black men or men, period. But women almost never, ever come into the conversation when it comes to domestic abuse or abuse. And by the way, abuse just is not physical. Of course, that is incredibly important. But you have emotional abuse and manipulation. And that scenario that I just shared, prime example of manipulation, how emotional abuse can be just as damaging. Those people could have ended up in jail. I mean, he could have literally lost his life over something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of sexual abuse, just in terms of what you brought up, if you read a paper put out by Dr. Tommy Curry and Dr. Ebony Utley, one of the things they found is that Black boys have the earliest sexual debut, meaning that they lose their virginity at the youngest ages, and primarily they lose their virginity to older girls and women. So Black boys tend to be sexualized to a far greater degree to a younger age than any other demographic, even in comparison to Black girls. So a lot of them are being violated. But here's the difference. If the only definition of sexual abuse we have is what happens to girls from grown men, then we tend to ignore all the other type of forms that it takes, whether it's from women or whatever else. And we also ignore it when it comes to boys. So the idea for boys is if an older woman violates them, they got it. Congratulations, you lost.
Yeah, congratulations. Yeah.
It's almost viewed, and not just by men. It's almost viewed, by men. It'll be highlighted as, oh, you got some. By women, it's can sometimes considered a almost damn near a public service. Like, she helped him out. But obviously, if you flip the genders in the dynamic, it's a sexual abuse issue. And we have to learn how to see boys, because the data tells us that boys have the same emotional and psychological reaction to sex before they're prepared for it, underage sex than girls. It's the same reaction, but one is criminalized and one is either ignored or somewhat high-fived. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny. That reminds me of an article I saw a few weeks ago that I've been trying to find because I wanted to post it, but it was a Black man talking about how in a corporate setting there had been multiple times where, and he was like, this is obviously not going to be popular to talk about, but he's like, there's been multiple times where white women or non-Black women have made sexual advancements at me in exchange for moving forward. Oh, yeah. Like each time I turned it down, I would be punished. I would always be demoted, or I would just straight up lose my job. And he, I think, mentioned at least 2 or 3. And he's like, this isn't popular because when you think of sexual abuse, it's never painted from the vantage point of a innocent white woman or a docile, young, beautiful, you know what I mean? It's never painted from that point, but it was like, I was victimized, but who's going to believe me?
Oh, no, I've been through that as well. I've definitely had that happen where I was told that, if I wanted to keep my job, I had to provide sexual service. That definitely happens to men. But interestingly enough, I just talked to a professor this morning who called me for advice on a different type of sexual harassment issue in the workplace. And one of the things I had to explain to him is that there's a type of racial and sexual discrimination against Black men that most people don't think about. A lot of it is based on stereotypes. So if you have people that fear you, that suggest that you're threatening because of just your presence, so on and so forth, that's actually a form of sexual discrimination against Black men, because it's tied to a very old set of stereotypes about Black men being violent, being criminalistic, and sexually threatening. So when you experience that in the workplace, so in other words, when we think about sexual harassment, we think about a woman. We think about somebody who maybe, was inappropriate with their hand, touching her or making a joke in her presence, or God forbid, she being completely violated at the workplace. But with men, it can present that way. But usually it's not as violent. Women tend to operate differently. So you might have a manager or a boss that'll require sex if you want to advance yourself. It's usually fairly like that. But you may also have people that fear you, refuse to work with you, or file grievances because they're scared of you and you haven't necessarily even done anything. That's actually tied to the perception of Black men. There's a lot to it that we have to explore. And this is the potential of the space that we're in, because these are conversations that Black men could not have in a public space 20 years ago.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think you're absolutely right. And so I do want to be mindful of your time. I have maybe one more question I want to ask you if you're open for it. Let me see, because I think this is a great segue into how you mentioned that for a long time these conversations have not been had. One of the very positive things about Kevin Samuels is that he, at the very least, created a platform or showed that it could be had and it could be well received. And so it'll be interesting to see how, moving forward, how people take whatever inspiration or motivation they got from him and use it as a reason and try to continue with more positive message. But with that, my question to you was, what do you think, just as far as Black male studies, where do you see it going maybe over the next decade or so? Do you see it maybe evolving, getting more attention from academia, mainstream? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I truly hope so. I mean, right now, to my knowledge, there's only 2 departments on Black male studies in the world. One is in Scotland with Dr. Tommy Curry at the University of Edinburgh, and my online Institute for Black Male Studies. At most, I don't want to say most, but in many universities, you may have one person teaching one class about Black men per year, one class per year. But to actually have a department that's dedicated to actually studying Black men, you only have 2 major options in the world that I know of. So I do hope it grows. I think it will. I think the numbers of people who are interested in exploring it are growing. But one of the things I encounter is a lot of graduate students who are being bullied. And so whether it's, I've been asked to sit on several PhD committees, dissertation committees, because when you're doing gender and you're interested in Black male studies, usually the primary people you have to use are feminists who take issue with it. So I've had plenty of young men, for example, who've had to worry about losing, being kicked out of their programs, being dropped from their programs or failed out, not because they're substandard students, but because the material they're interested in, like Dr. Tommy Curry, like myself, is considered incendiary, and feminists are offended by it. So they actually have to worry about losing their standing.
Wow.
So a lot of these guys are going to have to wait until they get tenure before they can delve into the material the way they'd like to. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with as of now, and I'm hoping we can expand that. And I think there are a lot of men, even who aren't in the academy, that are pushing the boundaries on this because they're interested in the material. They just, they just need a place to engage it.
Now, it's interesting that you say that, because you had mentioned this in our previous interview where, when you were coming up in college and studying, how you were made to focus on, but essentially you were reading things from a strictly feminist point of view. You mentioned having to read bell hooks, just other really, really famous feminists. And that was essentially the width and the breadth of your education, and anything contradictory to that vantage point was seen as problematic. It was seen as, an issue. But at the same time, with that, like on one, in the academia, you can't see things from another point of view. You can't see things really from a male point of view or from a Black male point of view without being demonized or being seen as a threat. But at another time, we see that there's money being made off of Black men, in their image, right? I think you've spoken about this on previous, right, on broadcast, how like Black Lives Matter, for example, how they've made money essentially off of the image of Black men, but it's been essentially off of their bodies, right? It's like profiting off of their bodies. So I mean, what do you think about that tension? And in one instance, it's like you can't talk about the Black male's perspective, but in another instance or another avenue, the Black male body is driving profit.
Exactly.
What do you think about that tension? Do you think there's going to be a merge? Do you think there's going to be a change?
Well, I think Black men are getting pissed off and they're getting tired of it, because in essence, what it tells you is shut up and die and let us use you. And short of that, you have nothing to say that we care about. We care. That's the thing. We care about you more in death than we do in life. That's the kind of subtext behind the behavior, right? Where Black men's deaths are welcome, but Black men themselves aren't. This is one of the things we saw with BLM.
Wow.
The early statement was, Black men can't serve as leaders in this organization. And I witnessed it. I've participated. I've been to meetings. Black men could not lead. And for Black male, heterosexual Black male run chapters of BLM, you'll find that they were often not acknowledged by the main organization. And many of them would not be funded. When they released the report on which chapters would get funding from the primary, like BLM Global or whatever, they didn't acknowledge or fund the heterosexual led chapters.
That's crazy. I had no idea. I'd heard, I know for a long time it's been overran by other, by other, like, just by women and by more feminist ideas. But I didn't know that they weren't allowing men to be in certain leadership positions.
Oh yeah. And that was very early on.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, and that's and of course, up until recently, within the last year, they had it on their website where they were talking about the alternative forms of family that they were interested in, and didn't mention men. No, not at all. And they didn't, and they undermined the whole idea of the nuclear family. So it took a while for us to kind of catch on, but men started to see it more and more. And men many men in the movement just broke off, and because many were activists anyway. So, BLM kind of snuck in, people participated because it got a lot of attention, and many men found out what it was, and they continued to do their activism just outside of BLM. And I had a brother a few weeks ago on my show, Dr. Hood Scholar. And this is
I've been in communication with them. We've been trying to set up some time to chat.
Yeah, he'd love to, but he ran a BLM chapter. He was an active member, and he talked in that show about his experience of being pushed out, and he wasn't alone. There were many that went through that, But that kind of that goes back to what we were talking about before, the contempt. right? The baked in contempt, and it's only been exacerbated by the, these kind of feminist talking points that have been, coming out of the university, and most particularly filtered through Oprah and Terry McMillan and a number of others, where it just kind of, became standard in the Black community. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. A lot of tech issues. I know what it is. If you've ever been a content creator, you have these days.
Man, and it's almost like you're like right in the middle of a really good point, and then it's like, I
understand. I've been there.
Oh man,
I've had my computer crash in the middle of a show. Trust me, I've been there.
It's funny. I didn't really understand. I guess I didn't really understand the need for producers and how some of these people, they have makeup artists and hairdressers and lighting. I didn't get it until I started doing my little YouTube stuff here, and I'm like, man, it really does take a group effort for this to be done well.
Yeah. And that's why when you see a YouTuber doing it well, people don't understand they're doing 10 different jobs. You know what I mean? And learning those 10 jobs while they do it. I mean, how many of us have been trained on working cameras and mics? I mean, we had to learn this on the fly, and some have gotten really good. Kevin was somebody that got really good.
Yeah.
Some of his brothers' skills are off the charts. But again, many of them had to learn and teach themselves a lot of this, But I see the post that you put on, the comment you put on the screen, about some of the things I teach in my course. It's kind of all over. I'm a Black male studies scholar, which is different than the Manosphere. It's primarily a movement taking place in the academy. There's a lot of overlap for a lot of people who are in the academy and kind of take in both, but they're not formally connected in that way. So I deal. If you want, what I'll do is I'll put the link to my blog in the chat, and you can kind of see. But when you really look at Black male studies, a lot of it has to do with understanding Black male life on empirical terms. What's measurably happening to Black men, not stereotypes, not assumptions. It's actually about what Black men actually live, and that's what a lot of what I do. So I have an Institute for Black Male Studies. You can literally go to instituteforblackmalestudies.com. You can see my work there, as well as the Onyx Report here on YouTube, and kind of get a sense of all that. So I put the link to the blog that I have out there, and you can check into the blog and look at some of the various articles I've written, get a feel from it there. But for me, I'm a Black male justice advocate. That's what, so my primary concern is, Black men and boys, and uplifting the quality of life.
Right. And we need more of you, we need more of what you stand for. And that is my hope. That is my hope with, this untimely passing and all that's happened, that this will continue to create a space where we can see more collaborative efforts for the dignity of Black men and really the Black community to be restored, or at the very least uplifted.
Absolutely.
So yeah, guys, definitely be sure to check them out. I did see another one here too. It says, I would like your permission to share your content on my TikTok page. I will credit you, but this info needs to get out. Please do. Feel free to do so. Like I said, this is always a pleasure. I think we do need to have more conversations like this. We need to have, and it needs not to be so siloed. It needs not to be women way over here complaining, and then men way over here feeling misunderstood. There needs to be a coming together in a effort to understand where both people are coming from, and not constantly painting the narrative or feeding into the narrative that we are each other's enemies.
All right. Well, and hopefully that we can build on that. My goal though, and yes, you can share my work on TikTok. I appreciate that. My goal is I really came into this starting with the blog that I posted. That was my entrance into Black men's rights, if as it were. And then I was invited into the space through Obsidian, and I kind of had some conversations there. Then began to work with BGS, and I was introduced to the Manosphere through that line. But I will say that my work is primarily concerned with, building a vocabulary for Black men to be able to articulate their experience, introduce the data that they can use to explain what their arguments are. Because again, we didn't have 40 years of feminism. I mean, that was the thing you asked me about earlier. I sat in classes and I learned this thing, but from when it came to Black men's issues, there was no support structure for that. We didn't have a means to ask certain questions because we didn't see any works that helped explain that. You had Black studies, you had Africana studies that many feminists considered to be overly male oriented. But what they mean by that is, if you talked about the civil rights movement, they would always bring up men like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, so on and so forth. But that's not the same as analyzing Black male life. So when this gender movement started, it really fixated on Black women, it fixated on LGBT, but there wasn't a lot of emphasis into heterosexual Black men's lives. We were treated as if we had no sexuality to speak of, and as if there was no sexism or racism against Black men that were intersected. So it took us a while to be able to develop this language. So for example, if you want to talk about sexism against Black men, people will tell you, we call it misandry, but people will say, well, it doesn't exist. Well, look at it this way. When you talk about lynching, overwhelmingly, the majority of lynchings of Black men were due to accusations of Black men having done something to white women. So that means that they were seeking out Black men. Heterosexual Black men were the primary targets. You can go to James Sedanius's work, Errol Miller's work. There's a lot of people that explain the gender dynamic there. But if nothing else, you just remember how raced and gendered lynchings were. That should tell you that Black men have experienced racism and sexism and the intersection of the two that is specifically targeted to them. And this is not something that was ever discussed in those feminist programs that I grew up in.
Yeah, intersectionality almost exclusively includes everyone except straight Black men. Exactly. I've never seen that term applied to straight Black men. Never.
They used to talk about us, but what they said was we were privileged. So they said Black women were oppressed in terms of race, class, sex, and gender. Black men were oppressed along all those axes, except in terms of gender, they were privileged. But the data didn't bear that out. If anything, the data showed that we were more oppressed on the basis of gender, not less. And so a lot of feminists just decided to ignore Black men altogether. But that's why you had people like James Sedanius that decided to go in and delve into why Black men were oppressed more. And there's a whole research base there. But the point is, we couldn't use Black feminism really, or womanism as a lens to study Black men. We needed to develop an entirely different lens because Black men are different from Black women. We have a different experience, but there was no space for that in contemporary gender discussion. So we had to. We've been building it, and I'm the intersection between Black male studies and the Manosphere. And so there are a number of us like Green Gorilla, Dr. Ronald Neal, who are kind of doing that work. But there's not been much space made in the academy for us to exist. If anything, most of us have been siloed. Many brothers have been forced out of the academy altogether. Talk to Dr. Hood Scholar, talk to Green Gorilla. Those brothers have been chased out of the academy.
Whoa.
So it's a war. A lot of it is a war.
Were they teachers?
What'd you say?
Was Dr. Hood Scholar, is he a teacher or was he teaching?
He was a professor. Both he and Green Gorilla were professors that were ran out of the academy.
That's not surprising. Yeah, that's okay. That's not surprising. I know I know of a one person in particular who's taking Africana studies, straight Black men taking Africana studies in Berkeley, and he's shared how it is exclusively LGBTQ. He's like, there's not, that's what it is. He's like, it should almost be named something else. And he's kind of talked about how he's felt incredibly marginalized by not being able to look at other perspectives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. It's deep. So, well, anyways, this has been, like I said, this has been always, as always, really informative, really interesting. So much content, so much jewels. I'm always glad to have these conversations with you and have you share your understanding and your knowledge. And like I said, hopefully we can really start to, or at least, I'll say on my platform, that is my goal, is to be a femininity channel that actually doesn't hate men, that appreciates men and sees the value in life and men, especially Black men, because I think for far too long, Black women in particular have been used against our own selves, not even fully knowing it, I think, or if we do know it, and sometimes just buying into it. But I think that's wrong.
Well, and I appreciate your work. You and I listen to very few, but you and Pink Book Lessons, I have a great deal of respect for. So I appreciate you doing this. I know how difficult it can be. I know the drama that you've had to deal with. So thank you for holding it down.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure, and so like I said, it needs to be done, because I think about, if I have Black boys, I don't want them to grow up in an environment where they look at their, women with their complexion as their enemy. I don't want to do that. So I know I can't control everything, but I can at least do my little part to try to help, to try to get a positive message out there, or to try to raise awareness of how the different toxic things that we might be supporting. So let me see. Slim Daddy, it says, Dr. Johnson, I'm an engineer with 35 years of experience. Contact me for help.
Not sure.
What to help you?
Yeah, if you go to my website, www.thasanjohnson.com, my email is at the top of that. You can click on that, send me an email, and we can go further, because I'm not sure what this is referring to.
What help? Yeah, I don't know what he's referring to either, but I do appreciate the support. So with that, do you have any other other final thoughts, or just other things you kind of want to leave the audience with, things to consider, things to think about, anything on your heart?
Well, I would just say support Shay. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed, share the channel, share the videos, get the word out, because these kinds of conversation, these kinds of analyses are necessary, and we got to be able to push back on the kind of narrative that we've been sold for the last few decades, and create a different space, most particularly for young boys, Black boys, who be able to grow up in a different context. But I will say this: when I look at Gen Z, a lot of the questions we're having about relationships and dating, they've already answered. And I don't know if people are ready for what's coming. I'm just telling you, as the father of a 16-year-old, y'all don't, man. They are not having a lot of the stuff my generation grew up with, relationship issues. They are not having it. Not having it.
So I don't have teenage kids, so I can't speak to this. But the only thing I can speak to that I'm seeing right now is some of the foolishness that I'm seeing on TikTok. And I'm like, if TikTok is any indication of what's going on with that generation, God help us all. I hope it's not. I know social media can be sometimes a bad tool to gauge the general behavior. So I don't want to believe what I'm seeing. But
yeah,
hopefully it's not
a whole different world. There's a whole different world. But thank you for letting me on and having this conversation. I appreciate you.
Always a pleasure. You're welcome on anytime. And like I said, guys, go check out his latest content. I know you did a live yesterday. The last few days are really, really, really good stuff. So
thank you.
Be sure to check it out. Check out his I think you said the link to the course if you want to sign up. I'll be sure to try to get that in the description too if people want to check it out after.
Thank you.
But, yeah, all good stuff. So thank you again. And yeah, have a good night.
All right. You do the same. And
all
peace
right.
To your husband as well.
Okay. All right, guys. So there we have it. Oh, I see. Okay. Tuning your PC's networking, huge data storage and streaming settings connections. All right. Well, I think he mentioned he does have an email. you can check out. So if you want to get in contact with him, please do so. Guys, this has been good. This has been good. A little longer stream than normal, but I thought it was, again, incredibly important to highlight some of the different things that we see going on impacting the community. And the different way I think Kevin Samuels, his life and his passing, really exposes just a lot of things, a lot of issues that have been brewing in the Black community for quite some time. So there was some really, really good information. I think there's also, I think the good thing that I see is that because a platform's been made, because we can control some of what we're saying, we can start to really initiate these conversations. We can really start to push for change. We don't have to just idly sit by and watch, men be disrespected, Black men be disrespected, Black community be disrespected. We don't have to just idly sit by and watch people create misandrist pieces or create just racist pieces, disrespectful pieces, and not say anything. And so, if nothing else, I hope these conversations cause some of you guys to stop and pause to consider the things that you've maybe been believing, the things that maybe you've been believing about maybe even yourself or about your brothers, about your cousins, about your dad, and seeing on whether or not it is a fair assessment or it is being programmed through much of the propaganda that we have seen. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this was inspiring, at the very least entertaining. All good stuff. I see y'all cold-blooded in these chats tonight. I'm going to say, guys, I'm not always able to, I'm making a point to try to acknowledge and read all the super chats, but I'm not always able to engage with all the comments outside of that because there's just so much going on. I'm trying to engage with the speaker usually. So I don't know all that was said other than the super chats. I hope y'all will be nice, but if not, y'all, please keep it respectful. Okay. Please keep it respectful. But anyways, guys, again, if you like the show, be sure to hit the like button before you leave. Again, you can show me support on Cash App or Venmo, Sade. Support your favorite content creators. If you like what we're doing, if you like what this is about, be sure to like, share, subscribe, show some love and support, as I do depend upon your support to keep this going. And my goal is to hopefully be able to bring you guys better content, a better setup, all of that. That is the goal if we can grow. So definitely support your favorite content creators. Also, shout out to all of you guys who've already shown love and support. Shout out to Dane C being a great moderator. Shout out to Kevin T, who's always showing support. Hakeem, Malarkey K. I see you guys. I have a few regulars in here who are always showing love, support. All of you guys who have shown love and support. Slim Daddy, I appreciate your multiple super chats. MS Delta Kai, all of you guys. If I missed your name, it's not because you're not valuable. Be sure that I will do my best to acknowledge all of you guys in due time. So anyways, thank you. This has been fun. If you missed the replay, no worries. Go back, catch it live. I'm going to drop timestamps in a bit. And stay tuned for other upcoming live and conversations and pre-records. Be sure, I saw some of you guys say you are not getting notified when I go live. That's okay. Be sure to subscribe and then also go and hit all of the notification button so you are notified as soon as I go live or as soon as I drop a video. And yeah, I think that's all I got for today, guys. We will talk later. Peace.